Chapter 228. What the hell? Papercut's exclamation was absolutely the thoughts of most people in the encrypted channel. Although the skinny figure was fast, there was not a single person in the encrypted channel who did not have sharp eyes and ears. They could clearly see the flickering changes of the figure. The skinny figure had clearly leaped out from the exploded corpse. The monitoring screen switched quickly. It switched continuously, but it only captured a fleeting afterimage. This situation persisted for around 3 to 5 seconds before the screen turned black once more. It was at this moment that all the monitoring screens were finished. Papercut hurriedly asked Bamboo Pole, "What's going on?" Bamboo Pole was helpless. "Don't ask me. Someone just used official channels to take away the highest level of authority in the monitoring system. Then, the order of justice probably carried out physical destruction. Now I can retreat." Most people ignored this clumsy joke. Their minds were still flashing with the earlier scene. The figure that leaped out from the disintegrated corpse. There was no doubt that the argument just now had a result. But the encrypted channel was extremely silent. Whether it was Luo Nan or poisonous snake Zhang Yingying, neither of them spoke. Clearly, they were taking Red Fox's emotions into consideration. Of course, this was good, but Papercut and Bamboo Pole glanced at each other. They secretly tightened their grip at the same time to prevent Red Fox from thinking things through and doing something irrational. "The police are here," Red Fox said coldly. The three of them were too eye-catching right now. They poked into the stream of people, holding their shoulders and arms. They looked like plainclothes thieves. A police officer controlling the order of the scene discovered this situation. He immediately approached with his gun pointed. Papercut would not dare to let go even if the Emperor of Heaven came, let alone the police. He did not know how to persuade Red Fox. Bamboo Pole used a method of provocation to speak. "A man is a man. If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss. Do as you please." Red Fox was surprisingly straightforward. Papercut and Bamboo Pole looked at each other when they heard this. They just felt that Red Fox was so calm that it gave them headache. They were unable to judge him. Red Fox just shook his shoulders and slid away from the grip of the two. He did not make any further movements. He just said calmly, "That fellow is Ghost Thunder. I met him once before." "Damn. It really is that big bomb." Papercut's answer was like a piece of paper that was broken with a touch. Ghost Thunder was one of the most famous Ablatum Knights of the Order of Justice in Xia City. This fellow's most famous ability was that he could turn most of the materials he came into contact with into terrifying explosive. Coupled with his extraordinary movement speed, whether it was attacking or assassinating, he was a terrifying character. The military shuttle's inexplicable verification had actually activated this terrifying character. No one knew who this guy's next target would be. The military has set the pace well. Scissors grumbled under his breath, but then he realized that something was wrong. It seemed like when the military shuttle flew in, a certain someone's reaction was very strange. He turned to look at Bamboo Pole. "What did you say earlier? Serious? Who's serious?" Bamboo Pole did not reply immediately. Instead, he sent a message into the encrypted channel. "We have met up with Red Fox. Be careful, it's Ghost Thunder." Now, everyone should have no objections to Mr. Luo's omnidirectional sensing ability. The one who spoke was He Yuing. No one would have thought that she, the operations manager, would not be afraid of blowing things up even though Zhang Yingying had misgivings. She would speak so directly. Papercut cried out bitterly in his heart. He instinctively reached out to grab Red Fox, but Red Fox did not move at all. His face was expressionless. Could it be that he was willing to accept his loss? Or was he drugged with bewitching drugs? Papercut retracted his hand in embarrassment. He Yuing did not pay attention to the matter of Ghost Thunder in the encrypted channel at this time. She just extended the topic of omnidirectional sensing. She issued an order. From now on, all communication must be done through the encrypted channel. Mr. Luo, cat eyes, confirm the current omnidirectional sensing radius. 55 meters. Cat Eyes' answer was straightforward. This number was 10% higher than her usual performance. 80 meters. Luo Nan's nervous activity suppression symptoms had already disappeared. He was freed from his state of turning a deaf ear. He hesitated for a moment when he heard this and reported a relatively conservative number. For the time being, Luo Nan was uncertain of He Yuan's mission requirements. He needed to be cautious. This was the limit of his ability to balance his life form and the purely material plane. He was a bit stronger than Cat Eyes, but he was far too lacking compared to the 500-meter sensing radius he had in his last operation. Sure enough, He Yuan was a bit surprised. 80 meters? Luo Nan was just about to explain when Zhang Yingying exposed the fact that she had violated the rules by looking up classified information. I remember that it was 500 meters in the briefing, but it was in an abnormal soul-attached state. Now that my body and soul are one, I can retain 16% of my sensing radius. Is the shield of truth really that useful? Luo Nan blinked. Was this number acceptable? He could not help but ask, what's the standard for 16%? Newbie. Zhang Yingying curled her lips in disgust, but she still explained, due to the limitations of the material plane, the normal sensing range of a mentally enhanced person in the state of body and soul as one has a huge gap when compared to the soul-attached, out-of-body state and other mental forms. Normally, a person who can reach 8% to 10% is considered qualified. On the other hand, for someone like Kat, who specializes in perception, when she becomes an architect, she can casually go out of body state. It is possible for her sensing range to explosively increase by 10 or 20 times. At that time, you won't be considered much. Cat Eyes did not respond to Zhang Yingying's praise. Luo Nan slowly nodded his head. He had a general understanding of his level and position. Zhang Yingying was right. The enhancement of the Shield of Truth played a crucial role in supporting his current sensing range. His sensing radius of 80 meters was achieved by relying on his strong physical body's endurance. However, Zhang Yingying had used the wrong data. Luo Nan's retention ratio wasn't 16%. It was 10% or even lower. Last time, Luo Nan's soul was in an out-of-body state. Thanks to the Wraith Sign's 2 consecutive sacrificial activities, Luo Nan's mental senses had reached a radius of 800 meters. Yesterday, the Wraith Sign had successfully hunted, causing his soul power to rise once again. Perhaps the upper limit of his sensing range would increase a little, but he didn't dare to try it anymore. The current range of Luo Nan's natural senses was only around 10 meters. The upper limit of his senses was 800 meters and only 2% of his senses were retained. This was 6 to 7 times lower than the lower limit. It was simply too horrible to look at. It was clear to see just how far the imbalance between his body and soul had reached. The increase in physical strength was not something that could be done in a day. It could not be rushed. However, Luo Nan had reason to believe that even if the effects of the Shield of Truth disappeared in the future, his retention ratio would no longer hover at the level of 1%. Instead, it would increase by a considerable amount. As for how much it would increase, that would depend on his life sketch. It would depend on whether or not it was a reasonable and self-consistent new explanation of the old world. Right now, it looked like this was indeed a feasible direction. Draw a sketch. Refine a configuration. Use the most basic of points and lines to depict a rough and distinct life sketch. When the life sketch was simplified to its pinnacle, just like Cat Eyes and Zhang Yingying, every living being was depicted with concise points and lines. They were like groups of constellations on an ancient star atlas. They were shaken to various parts of the deep void, and with Luo Nan as the center, they revolved and cruised. And this star atlas was endlessly expanding deeper and wider. The current range had already expanded to over 100 meters, completely covering Area A of Frost River reality. Chapter 229. This was perhaps the clearest command He Yuan had issued since the beginning of tonight's operation. She even used the form of text to post the instructions in the encrypted channel. Current objective: eliminate all gunmen of the order. Priority is given to the non-ability users. Luonan is the first executor of Frost River reality and the connected buildings, while Cat Eyes is the second executor. Everyone else, protect Luonan and Cat Eyes as they move safely. Ensure that the entire range of Luonan senses covers the entirety of Frost River reality and the connected buildings. What does that mean? The target itself was very clear, but not many people understood He Yuan's intentions. If he wanted to deal with the enemy, what about the Oblatum Knights of the Church? What about An Wang and the other secular officiants? That was the real deal. It's true that the opponent is currently focusing all his attention on Child, but do you really think he's a target when you make a move? I really don't know what He Yuan is thinking. Papercut turned his head to look at Bamboo Pole. You've been on a mission with the secretary before. Was she like this before? Papercut had already spoken rather tactfully. His true meaning was, why did this commander of the military's elite Deep Blue Walkers feel so unreliable? Bamboo Pole didn't say anything. He just smiled and tapped his ear, reminding him that He Yuan had already ordered all communication to be done through the encrypted channel set up by the Hexeer. As the commander, He Yuan issued an official order, and the encrypted channel immediately cleared up. Only the status of execution could be reported. To put it bluntly, this meant, from now on, everyone just focus on doing their job and don't talk nonsense. Next, He Yuan sent out even more specific orders and details within the encrypted channel. Luonan, Cat Eyes, and Shui Lei form the inner circle. Shui Weiluan and the Special Police will follow standard operational procedures and execute a closed-loop defense. White Salt, Yingying, and I will coordinate with each other on the perimeter. We will cover our advance in the 10 o'clock direction. Outside of Frost River reality, Papercut, who possessed some basic tactical accomplishments, felt his scalp go numb following He Yuan's command. There was nothing much to say about his route of action. The 10 o'clock direction was roughly a 60-degree angle from the Chu-He-Han boundary, between the private room area and the public arena. Then, he moved sideways. The goal was very clear. It was to display Luonan's all-encompassing sensing ability to the greatest limit. He would cover the enemies in Area A while pulling apart the distance to react. This choice was very correct. The problem was the formation. The SWAT team's closed-loop defense was a tactical formation used in close-range anti-riot operations. It could be used to protect the target within the closed loop when facing the siege of a large number of thugs who did not have long-range killing weapons. But now, He Yuan and the others were not only facing the cold-blooded gunmen of the Order, but also Ghost Thunder, who had a lot of long-range attacks. What would they do if they were hit in the middle by a high-explosive thunder fire? This. Just what was He Yuan thinking? While Papercut was dumbstruck, Bamboo Pole gestured for him to calm down and not be impatient. Bamboo Pole hinted at Red Fox, indicating that he could restrain himself right now. What about Papercut? At the moment, Bamboo Pole was still providing basic technical support for the logo. In order to avoid any accidents, he took the initiative to ask in the encrypted channel after he appeased Papercut, "Boss Luo, can you confirm that the information conversion of the logo is normal?" Luonan probably still wasn't used to this. 3 seconds passed before he said, "It's normal." Papercut scratched his head. He believed that quite a few of his companions who were participating in the operation were feeling the same way as him. Though there was certainly no one who doubted Luonan's sensing ability right now, this person was still too noob when it came to doing things. Bamboo Pole, on the other hand, was very patient. He explained one by one, "In order to ensure timely updates, I have already relinquished control rights. Right now, you are the #1 controller. The secretary and kitten can mark the route and insert flags to make corrections. Have you played the classic Minesweeper before? That's what it means. Right now, you can use telekinesis mode to reset the logo into the encrypted channel. Oh, okay. Another 2 seconds passed, and the logo in the encrypted channel was finally reset. The logo was still based on the elevation of Frost River reality. It was densely covered with red and green dots. Those who had participated in the previous debate noticed that the location of the fat corpse no longer had a red dot. It looked like the specific content had been updated. Bamboo Pole gestured an OK to Papercut and Red Fox. He winked, indicating that the little fellow could still be saved. Red Fox's response was cold. Papercut smiled wryly. He felt that he had perfectly substituted himself into Red Fox's previous role. It was awkward no matter how he looked at it. Was he too neurotic? He tried to return to his previous peaceful state, but before Bamboo Pole could put down his hand, nearly half of the 16 or 17 red dots on the logo that represented the enemy were erased in a single breath. What's going on? Papercut felt very mystified. He nearly fainted. Even this can be mishandled? Right now, He-Wayne was marking the next course of action on the logo. The extending blue arrow clearly stopped. She seemed to be stunned by this sudden scene. The encrypted channel was deathly silent for a time until Luo Nan's voice rang out. He was clearly inexperienced, but he strove to be experienced. It was just like the soldier's report. 7 gunmen have been eliminated. He-Wayne. Cat eyes? Question mark. Bamboo pole? Exclamation point. Papercut blurted out, "What the hell?" As for Red Fox, he smacked his fists against his palms, creating a crisp bang. Zhang Yingying had been bouncing around to warm up her body, preparing to deal with the upcoming fierce battle. She nearly sprained her ankle when Luo Nan's message came out. She rushed to support Bai Xinyan, turned her head and shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Everyone's reactions were different at this very moment. On the map, most of the motionless red dots suddenly became restless. Luo Nan's message continued to update while Cat Eyes added in a hoarse voice, "There are Ablatum Knights advancing toward us. 3:00 direction." They disappeared. The possibility of it being Ghost Thunder is extremely high. There are still 3 more behind them. No, 4. It was as if an invisible drum had exploded in the air. The situation that had been stagnant all this time suddenly entered a high-altitude stalling state. Nearly everyone could feel a dizziness that bordered on absurd. He-Wayne displayed her top-notch mental qualities at this moment. She did not waste words and gave another order, 10:00 direction. Yingying, hold down the pace. White Salt and I will protect the right flank. Move. The instant her words fell, everyone's vision suddenly darkened. The spectators outside of Frost River reality cried out in alarm at the same time. At this moment, the focus of everyone's gazes, the triangular spaceship's power supply was cut off. The spaceship instantly darkened, and the interior of the spaceship was pitch black in comparison to the spotlights outside. Only a second or 2 passed before the cries of alarm scattered. This was because the darkness did not just cover Frost River reality. It spread to the 3 connected buildings at an inconceivable speed. Chapter 230. The darkness that suddenly descended within Frost River reality was like a curtain that covered one's face. Theoretically speaking, ability users with extraordinary powers and special forces equipped with exoskeleton armor would not be affected by the darkness. However, an atmosphere filled with malice and murderous intent followed the arrival of the darkness. Feelings and such were fabricated. They floated in the air, but the restless negative psychic pressure was real. The group of people from the society did not know the range of the darkness for now. However, they could personally feel the urgency and impatience within the darkness. The more it was like this, the more they needed to be steady. Under He-Wayne's deployment, Luo Nan was surrounded by the special forces armed with guns and shields. He advanced sideways, but his speed was not fast. Maintaining the formation was his #1 priority. Ghost Thunder and the other Ablatum Knights advanced with all their might. The distance between the two sides rapidly closed. Every Ablatum Knight was equivalent to AC+ rank awakened. They were infinitely close to the architect level. Overall, they followed the consistent logic of the order and cultivated strictly. The power they possessed was more focused, direct, and tyrannical than ability users with outstanding personalities. Moreover, there was a natural tacit understanding between them. When the 4 Ablatum Knights turned their attention to the Society's team at the same time, their malice intertwined with each other and blended with the darkness. It was like an incorporeal and brutal evil beast that roared soundlessly. At this moment, the format pyramid on the bodies of Xue Weiluan, his father, and the special forces shook at the same time. They were like candlelight in the wind, nearly extinguished. All of the attacks followed the flow of energy and information. Several firecrackers exploded on Luonan's mental plane. The attacks on the mental plane disturbed the structure of his body and soul. Luonan's feet were a bit messed up. Then Cat Eyes and Xue Lei grabbed his arms one after the other. They supported him as he moved. Cat Eyes did not say a word. Xue Lei whispered, "Nanster, are you okay?" Luonan shook his head. The enemy's response was very decisive. They immediately changed directions and advanced. They coordinated with the power outage, and used the darkness to launch a powerful attack. It was filled with the feeling of planning. The faintly discernible feeling of discomfort that had been present ever since he left the luxurious room appeared once more. But this time, the feeling of indescribable inexplicable had lessened. The constellations circling within his mental senses were clearly revealing something. Luonan used a brand new perspective to analyze this dark and subtle hidden information. The most fundamental purpose of drawing the life sketches was to come up with a new explanation of the world in a dimension that was most suitable for him. He wanted to establish an axis and establish rules. Because of this, when Luonan drew these life sketches and pieced them together to form a marvelous starry sky, large amounts of chaotic information no longer rushed at him like a swarm of bees. Instead, they revolved around each constellation, interacting with each other. Only after a buffering and combing process was Luonan able to selectively extract the information. Such a model was also very crude. Compared to the feedback he received when his soul left his body in an out-of-body state, it was even more inferior. Many meaningful details would certainly be left out, and there would be a lot of redundancy at the same time. But in the end, it was an effective method of explanation, and it was most suited to Luonan's reality. It didn't matter what sort of secret methods the other party used. As long as they were effective against Luonan, Luonan would be able to sense them. Naturally, there would be a new explanation for them on this star atlas. They would be incorporated into Luonan's rules, making it convenient for him to finally trace the source and lock onto the target. Originally, the information was very vague, but as the 4 Ablatum Knights advanced like a hurricane, Luonan's mind was filled with warning bells, and he was able to see things more clearly. In his eyes, the darkness was the background of the profound void. Dozens of constellations and hundreds of thousands of stars were circling back and forth. Now, they were rapidly approaching and clashing with each other, bringing an unprecedented brilliance to the star map that had been relatively still. It formed an interesting contrast with the restless negative spiritual pressure on the plane of reality. Everyone's life sketches were different. They appeared in the form of constellations. Some were simple, some were complex, some were clear, and some were blurry. Zhang Yingying and Cat Eyes were simple and clear. He already had a relatively deep understanding of them in the past. He Wen and Bai Xinyan were powerful and their configurations were exquisite and exquisite. With his current level of analysis, there were naturally more areas that were vague and ambiguous. As for the 4 Ablatum Knights represented by Ghost Thunder, they were strong and had deep enmity towards him. It was even more difficult for them to draw it clearly. Within Luonan's mental senses, The 4 knights, one in front and the other 3 at the back, were like 4 balls of nebula dust that had exploded in deep space. They came pouncing over. The collision on the star map level was a bit faster than the collision on the plane of reality, and when the 2 sides of the blurry chaos collided, the nodes and lines that were originally not very clear were purged of the dense fog. They suddenly became much clearer. As the star map changed, He Wing, who was protecting the flank, issued an order: "White salt, cover." Just as her voice fell, the ceiling above the pitch-black sky exploded with a rumble. The decorative planks shattered in the explosion, turning into shrapnel that splashed in all directions. The special police officers were well trained. The shield-bearers raised their shields at the same time, blocking the space above them. Clanging sounds rang out for a time. There were even a few popping sounds of explosions mixed in with the subtle cracking sounds of the shield's structure being damaged. The explosion-proof shields could block the inner ring, but they were useless against He Wing, Bai Xinyan, and Zhang Yingying, who were roaming around the outer ring. Zhang Yingying was fine. She took 2 quick steps to the front and evaded it. The remaining 2 were within the range of the explosive shrapnel, and their reactions were completely different. Bai Xinyan's movement speed did not change at all. It was just that a cold wave suddenly rose from her body, sweeping through the air. Any shrapnel or explosive lightning was instantly frozen. Even the corresponding kinetic energy was stripped away. They rustled like snow, falling to the ground. Such an unscientific spectacle nearly made the eyes of the special police officers pop out of their socket. Only now did they understand the meaning behind He Yuan's so-called cover. As for He Yuan, she did not retreat when the cold wave flooded the darkness. Instead, she advanced. Her figure could still be seen with her first step. Her second step was blurred and distorted. By the time she took her third step, her figure had completely disappeared. Only a brilliant arc of light sliced through the darkness. And the arc of light was already 30 meters away. Right now, the average distance between the 4 Ablatum Knights and the team was only around 40 meters. Right now, He Yuan had clearly killed her way to the front of the enemy's pouncing formation. If she was even the slightest bit sluggish, there would be a fatal risk of being attacked from all sides by the enemy. But the arc of light was far too fast. They didn't have the time to truly worry about anything. The brilliant arc of light suddenly flashed and extinguished. Practically no sound could be heard as the arc of light flickered and extinguished. But a certain constellation immediately fell apart in Luonan's perception on the star atlas. It dimmed and disappeared. It was only at this time that the people with the sharpest ears were barely able to hear the sound of blood splattering within the dark air. Shuelei drew a cold breath to the side. "A kill in 10 steps. Cat Eye's voice was hoarse within the encrypted channel. "Ghost Thunder killed confirmed." The channel was a sheet of silence until He Yuan issued a new order. 12 o'clock direction. Accelerate. Following the order, Zhang Yingying, who was in front, did not utter a word. She turned around and sped up. And at the edge of the darkness where the team met, He Yuan's figure appeared. She continued to protect the flank, as if nothing had happened before. If there was any change, it would be that she shot a glance toward the center of the formation. Her target was not Luonan, but Shuelei, who had just lost his voice. Chapter 231. Luonan paid no attention to the minute changes around him. His entire mind was focused on the changes in the star atlas. The instant He Yuan killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash, she also cut open the layer of hazy nebula dust surrounding Ghost Thunder. Before Ghost Thunder died, his constellation finally appeared clearly. Even though it soon dimmed and disappeared, the internal structure of the constellation was still a good reference for Luonan to analyze the other Ablatum Knights of the same order. In the blink of an eye, Luonan's star atlas became much clearer. Correspondingly, the obscure and unclear external force that was exerted from the void became harder to hide. Luonan could see from the star atlas that the force was secretly interacting with the assault formation of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, Ghost Thunder, who was at the front, was killed with a single slash. The force, which was still being deployed, was thrown into chaos. It struggled a few times before it finally scattered. Oh crap! Luonan began to worry for the other side. The force was actually quite considerable, but it leaned towards the mental plane. In order to be effective on the material plane, one needed to find a more suitable entry point for interference. Therefore, it had not been able to truly move down. It just circulated and spiraled, accumulating power in preparation for a thunderous strike. In terms of judgment, awareness, and techniques for accumulating power, He Yuan was 1,000 times more professional than Huang Bingzhen, who had been shoved into a corner. However, the other side clearly had bad luck. It was not easy for them to have the opportunity to interfere through the use of the 4 Ablatum Knight. However, He Yuan's frighteningly powerful slash had struck their weak spot. They had probably already suffered a backlash, causing the accumulated power to collapse and scatter in all directions. It was not a big deal for this considerable power to scatter, but it was a disruption to the overall situation of Frost River reality. The special police officers around Luonan were clearly wearing thermostatic exoskeleton armors, but they were shivering. They were affected by the corrosion of this scattered power. But soon, the nearly extinguished format pyramid on everyone's chests lit up once more. It was repaired and perfected, cleanly expelling this inexplicable chill. Your reaction is quite fast this time. Bai Xinyan gave a light praise in the channel. She took the opportunity to ask, "Your body is fine, right? Is there a time limit to the blessing of the Shield of Truth?" "It should be fine," Luonan responded casually. Most of his mind was still focused on the Star Atlas. The timely addition of the format pyramid's augmentation wasn't due to his fast reaction. Instead, it was because he was trying his best to maintain the star chart that he had drawn with great difficulty. Why was Luonan worried for the enemy? It was all because the effects of the energy dissipation were too annoying. In the next few seconds, Frost River reality was a scene of chaos. The trapped citizens were already terrified and restless in the darkness. They were swept by this power that was brimming with negative psychic waves. Their mental defenses were about to collapse. For a time, screams and wails rang out in Area A. Even when the gunmen went on a killing spree, it was not as miserable as this. If the hearts of the people became unstable, the life sketches would also be affected. Luonan had been mulling over whether or not he should give a boost to everyone within the range of his senses, but it was too late in the end. Stabilizing the souls of almost 100 people and sorting out their auras in the midst of the rampaging negative spiritual waves was beyond his ability. In the end, the star map couldn't help but shake violently. Luonan felt that all the stars were trembling. There were many phenomena of displacement. The structures that had appeared before were all deforming. This destroyed nearly half of Luonan's efforts. Damn it! Luonan could not help but curse. What's going on over there? Shui Lei's gaze glanced at He Yuan a few times. In the end, he could not help but ask in a low voice. Right now, his ears were filled with screams and wails. He could not stand this atmosphere. He would rather have a few powerful enemies jump out and fight with his life on the line. But at this time, the Ablatum Knights were intimidated by He Yuan's ghost-like blade techniques and the collapse of the augmentation behind them. They hesitated to move forward, and the team advanced incomparably smoothly. Luonan shook his head, temporarily dispelling the vexation in his mind. He sent a message in the encrypted channel, comforting Shui Lei and reporting the situation of his observations. It's nothing for now. It's just that someone is up to no good, but Secretary He / caused a backlash. His power has gone out of control. He can't cause any substantial damage. There were no more than 3 people in the entire team who could truly understand Luonan's words. However, no one doubted Luonan's words anymore after his successive highlights. Instead, they were affected by his train of thought. Most of them guessed and pondered. and at this time, Cat Eyes reported, my range of perception has been affected. Right now, it has a radius of 38 meters. Mr. Luo? He Yuan immediately looked for Luonan to confirm. Luonan did a rough scan. Though the star atlas had yet to dissipate, the range of his perception was not greatly affected. The positions of every ablatum night were within his grasp. He immediately said, my side is fine. Zhang Yingying jumped out. How much is fine? 80 meters. The number Luonan reported was the same as before. In fact, the radius of his perception on the life plane had already broken through 120 meters, and it was still expanding at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Oh, hold on. Did I make a mistake? Luonan's train of thought suddenly deviated while Zhang Yingying was still sighing with emotion. How strange. The more I look at you, the more I feel that your all-encompassing perception is abnormal. Why are you always able to see things that others can't? Is it because of the psychic's abilities mixed in? The level is very high. The perspective is different. Cat Eyes gave Luonan a rare positive evaluation from the side. And this was the result of her constant observation. The direction of application is different. Bai Xinyan joined in the discussion. Cat's long-range perception is closely coordinated with her body technique. Student Luonan seems to be more focused on pure observation. Of course, it's easier for him to be disconnected. Yes, the direction is different. Luonan suddenly responded. Cat Eyes needs to make a timely response to all changes within the range of her perception. Every detail needs to be clear. And I don't need to consider other problems. I just need to make a choice between precision, range, and level according to the observation requirement. It's fine. There was no way to continue this discussion. Zhang Yingying looked up at the sky and rolled her eyes. This is the strangest thing. So it turns out that your family's mental senses can be adjusted at will? You make it so that the tens of thousands of ability users who have cultivated painstakingly, pondered carefully, and finally found the most suitable soul frequency with great difficulty. Just like this, the millions upon millions of ability users who have fixed the direction of mental enhancement, how do they feel? The discussion in the encrypted channel came to a screeching halt. Luonan didn't know that he had instantly ended a topic. Right now his heart was filled with relief and joy. Sure enough, communication was the best way to solve problems. If it weren't for this, he would still be madly sprinting in the wrong direction. It's too thin. It's too narrow. When he drew his life sketch, there was a problem with the direction of his focus. Just like when drawing, the most taboo was to dig into the details and highlight the parts. Right now, he was unable to project his limited mind into those inexhaustible, deep layers of configurations. Even though the star atlas was chaotic and endlessly turbulent, not a single one of the ablatum knights or the trapped civilians could escape his clairvoyance. In the end, that obscure and unknown power was locked onto by his observation. This wasn't because he had dug into the sketches in great detail. Instead, it was because he had grasped the overall composition of the area of perception. He could observe its general outline and know its direction. It was enough. He didn't dig into the details. He looked at the overall situation. He was able to observe the entire domain of interference between the mental and material planes. He was able to observe the entire plane of life. Chapter 232. In order to understand the whole, one must first see. Simply see. Luonan's previous clairvoyance mode could not break away from the pattern of the old explanation. He had to honestly expand his domain step by step. He had to consider the body's ability to endure and process enormous amounts of information. But after changing to a new explanation, it was still a sketch to begin with. It was a general impression of the whole. It was a recreation of one's feelings and memories. One only needed to grasp one or two characteristics of life dynamics and use simple brushwork to synthesize them. This was the difference between sketching and sketching. It was the difference between meticulous brushwork and freehand brushwork. Luo Nan summarized life sketches into sketches and configurations. Sketches should be the first. This was the core of the whole train of thought. It was the true direction of application. Before the composition of the whole was confirmed, no matter how real the details were, they could be distorted and absurd when viewed as a whole. Just like the chaotic star atlas outside his body right now. The whole. The whole. Luo Nan emphasized to himself in a hypnotic manner. He closed his eyes, opened them, and then closed them again. Through this method, he forgot all of his old-fashioned modes of observation. He let his thoughts and consciousness expand outwards, to higher heights, to further places, and to wider places. At this moment, the range of his clairvoyance was like a contracting and expanding heart. It was like the rising and falling tide. Contracting, expanding, rising, falling. The frequency of the conversion grew faster and faster. The range of conversion grew larger and larger. Suddenly, some indescribable limit was broken. It was like a great river bursting its banks, overflowing in all directions. It was like an iron mold shattering. There was no longer any fixed pattern. There was an instant when Luo Nan felt that his body and soul were about to scatter into the void. Only when the dark chains trembled and the power of the "my heart's a prison" format appeared did Luo Nan retract. It was also in this instant that the range of Luo Nan's mental senses recovered to the peak value of his out-of-body state. It reached 800 meters. In a few breaths of time, the radius exceeded a kilometer, and it was still expanding. The entire Frost River reality, including the 3 buildings that supported the amusement park, and even some of the surrounding areas were all within the range of his clairvoyance. Blurry constellations appeared one after another. Everyone within Frost River reality was not limited to the people by Luo Nan's side. This included Fairchild, Bays, the 7 Ablatum Knights, and nearly 100 trapped citizens. Then there were the people outside of Frost River reality. There were even the police officers on the 3 bearing buildings. There were tens of thousands of spectators. There were stars as bright as diamonds in the constellation system. There were also shadows that were hard to see. There were even dark clouds that were hazy and turbid. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects, and it was difficult to analyze them. Although he didn't try his best to depict it, there was a wonderful connection between motion and stillness, between inanimate objects and life, between the known and the unknown. Light and shadow intertwined. Light and dark corresponded. Illusory and real interacted with each other. Under their interaction, the boundaries between each constellation, shadow, and dark cloud gradually blurred. They intertwined with each other, but their trajectories were clear. The Dharma and Logos were in harmony. Finally, they turned into an endless winding galaxy that spread out. Without a doubt, this was the most profound and vast picture Luo Nan had ever drawn in his entire life. It contained layers and mysteries that were hard to fathom. If it was possible, Luo Nan really wanted to be intoxicated by it. He wanted to ponder over every detail. But today, he would no longer sink into it. He just used an independent, transcendent, wondrous perspective to capture and draw the outline of the structure of this star river. Overall, it was more appropriate to use the word star river to describe this feeling. It was as if Luo Nan was standing at the center of an enormous galaxy. The starlight was sparse in the area he was in, but 3 enormous and bright spiral arms unfolded in his surroundings. These arms accurately represented the number of living beings in Frost River reality and the 3 buildings. However, there was a hazy dark cloud entrenched at the top of each of the 3 spiral arms. It blocked the starlight. The 3 dark clouds were connected to each other, outlining a turbid domain of darkness. The domain pressed heavily above the star river. There were even many penetrations. It was difficult to see the true appearance of the inside. There was no doubt that the three dark clouds were where the secular first oblatums of the Order of Justice were located. Looking at the current situation, Luo Nan's previous judgment was probably correct. The three first oblatums were all here. Yes, the most important target of tonight had been found. The range of Luo Nan's mental senses continued to expand. Only when the limit of the range exceeded 2 kilometers did the expansion show signs of weakening. The enormous picture of the galaxy had already covered 3 prosperous blocks. The highest point was the high-altitude traffic layer, and the lowest point was the enormous underground drainage system of the city. There were tens of thousands of life sketches that represented living beings, and it was hard to count the number of stars. Of course, from Luo Nan's perspective, the pure void and inanimate objects were merely meaningless shadowy regions. Unless he was willing to expend a great deal of energy, transform his mode, and deliberately observe with clairvoyance. At this time, Luo Nan felt the pressure once more. The stars affected each other and acted upon each other. In the end, an enormous tension was formed in the depths of the river of stars. It also formed far too much redundant information. In addition, the greater the size, the greater the level of contact, and the amount of information received would naturally increase. Even if he didn't actively sense it, the enormous life level of Xia City's metropolitan area was like a myriad of galaxies in the deep sky, shining light over. Luo Nan pondered for a moment. He took the initiative to reduce the radius of his senses to 1,500 meters. Then he continued to shrink it back. In the end, it reached a kilometer or so. It just so happened to include the entirety of Frost River reality and the conjoined skyscrapers within it. Now that it had stabilized, there was enough margin left. The brilliant Milky Way flowed silently, the light of the stars parted, and the shadows shifted. Luo Nan maintained a vague and subtle connection with the faintly unending starlight projection in the distance. As the range of his clairvoyance was determined, the expanding power was retracted. His detailed senses began to become more sensitive, and the interaction between them began to fine-tune. It even spontaneously affected the subtle discordant areas. Luo Nan didn't need to observe it directly to tear apart many areas of chaos. However, the dark clouds located at the top of the 3 skyscrapers were still thick and stable. It was hard to observe them. Well, at least 2 of them were like this. As for the other one, there was an excess of accumulation, but there was a lack of thickness. Why was it a bit familiar? Luo Nan had a plan in mind. He temporarily withdrew his mind and naturally reached into his pocket. His mind was free of distractions. He completely forgot that his arms were being held by Shuelei and Cat Eyes. He didn't manage to reach the right spot. His forearm swung down and he swung it far away. He smacked a plump and elastic spot, and there was a faint sound. Cat Eyes instantly turned her head to this side. Even though they were in the darkness and the brim of her hat covered them, her eyes still flickered with a cold light. It was so piercing that Luo Nan couldn't help but squint his eyes. However, the most important thing was to take out the object. Though his hand felt like the fabric of his pants, it wasn't his pocket. Luo Nan was rubbed twice nearby, but he was unable to pull his arm back. He could only speak to Cat Eyes. "You let go. I'll take the object." At this moment, Luo Nan seemed to feel Cat Eyes tighten her grip on his arm slightly. But in the end, she didn't say anything. She just let go of his hand. Luo Nan finally reached into his pocket and took out the metal box. He weighed it in his hand. Cat Eyes' hand noiselessly returned to his arm at this time. She continued to support him, and she spoke in a husky voice that was rarely heard. "Do you need help?" Luo Nan looked at Cat Eyes once more. Her eyes were still as bright and cold as before, but there was an unfathomable curve to the corner of her lips that was blurry in the darkness. Her lips hooked up slightly. It was quite contradictory, but there was a novel feeling that Luo Nan had never felt before. Luo Nan looked at her, and he had the urge to immediately pick up his brush and draw. Chapter 233. Break it. The cold light in Cat Eyes' eyes dimmed. She was a bit suspicious. You're not going to use it as evidence? Luonan blinked again, but he had already drafted a script in his mind. He said, yes. I suspect that this toy has been tampered with. The enemy has used it to establish a snake nest and lock onto our position. Many people raised their eyebrows as soon as he said this. Luonan's words had violated He Yuan's request. His words had entered the ears of others. But no one was paying attention to this right now. Is that so? Zhang Yingying turned her head in curiosity. Think back to the previous time. If the secretary hadn't killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash and affected the enemy's methods, they might have already made their move. At least this is what I feel. Luonan relied on the little bit of credibility he had just established to speak without thinking. In the end, his logic was a mess. But now there were people who believed him. Zhang Yingying's eyes went wide. Then, why haven't you thrown it away yet? We have to break it first, right? Humph, Fairchild gave this to you. If he comes back and denounces you, will he? Luonan's astonished expression defeated everything. Zhang Yingying waved her hand. Forget it. Since you say so, watch me. Her voice had just fallen when a clear sound rang in everyone's ears. It was like the trembling of a wind chime. It was pleasing to the ear and heart. Luonan's hand trembled slightly. He saw this rather thick metal box silently split into two halves. A weak electric flame flickered and then disappeared without a trace. The split was right above his thumb and forefinger. A bit of cold air seeped into his skin. It was as if a sharp and invisible blade had cut across his skin. Hey! Luonan could not help but stare with wide eyes. His body sank a bit. There was absolutely no problem with applying for a severed limb. No need to thank me. Zhang Yingying beamed and waved her hand. Still not throwing it away? It should be fine. Luonan was speechless towards Zhang Yingying. He just replied without thinking. But his mind stirred and he added, I don't know who the first to blade him was. It looks like he's pretty average. Ghost Thunder's death completely severed the subsequent changes. Zhang Yingying could not help but roll her eyes. No matter how average he was still a clear oath first to blade him. In terms of strength, he was able to crush everyone here except He Yuan and Bai Xinyan. Just as these words reached the tip of his tongue, a flat voice rang out from the side. Of the 3 first ablatems of the Order of Justice in Xia City, Chengli is probably the one whose words are truthful. He's the youngest, and he relies on his ancestors. His great-uncle is in Wang. Chengli. Just as Zhang Yingying was about to interrupt, He Yuan coldly shot her a glance and pointed at her earlobe. Clearly, he was reminding them not to violate his request and chat casually. What a double standard! The boss is the boss. Zhang Yingying sent a thumbs-up emoji in the encrypted channel, her sarcasm overflowing. Luonan was very surprised. He looked stupidly at He Yuan. No one should have understood the purpose of what he had just said, but He Yuan had cooperated seamlessly with him. If that person was really in Chengli, then the effect of those 2 sentences would be many times better than his. He Yuan turned her gaze over and gave a slight nod. Luonan did not have the time to think in detail. His mind stirred slightly. He looked at He Yuan, but on the plane of his splendid galaxy form, the dark cloud that he had locked onto long ago surged. It had already lost its steadiness, and now it was surging and churning. Although its aura was astonishing, it could not compare to the other 2 majestic and solemn performances. Moreover, this dark cloud was splitting off streams of turbid undercurrents. They rushed in the direction of Frost River reality and seeped down. Luonan already felt a chill while the dark cloud was still circling and accumulating energy. The others' target was this place. Their malice was clear, but they were clearly impatient and angry. The color of their emotions appeared within Luonan's clairvoyance. The matter could not be delayed. Luonan casually tossed away the metal box that had already been cut in half. His mind scattered into the surrounding dark air. The metal box contained the consumables needed to create the human-faced arachnid. It was useless to take it out by itself. It would only dirty his hands. But as long as he had a matching computer and printer, he could form complex and clear written materials. Luonan was probably the best companion in this small area of Xia City. At least from the current situation, the Order of Justice's research on the human-faced arachnid was not any deeper than his. The ink was currently drifting away into nothingness. Other people were unable to sense it, but Luonan's soul strength gathered it noiselessly. He needed it twice, but he still felt a bit awkward. His consciousness sunk into the external neuron and he opened the format pyramid interface. Through this interface, he could communicate with the Wraith sign, who was several dozen kilometers away. He did not need the Wraith sign to do anything. It just needed to stay there and be a model for him. However, he never expected that the Wraith sign would be captured through the original format pyramid system. He had just set up the Galaxy Clairvoyance system to receive information from the Wraith sign. The range of Luonan's clairvoyance could not reach that far, but it was just as he had sensed before. The larger the volume, the richer the information received. The Wraith sign was not a living being. The depths of its structure were a mass of primal chaos. There was no life sketch to speak of. However, the structure of the primal chaos formed an obscure shadow under the illumination of other starlight and under the pull of the format pyramid system. The shadow was projected over a great distance. The power of a simple projection was too small. It could not be of much use, but it was a very good model. Luonan originally just wanted to follow the structure of the Wraith sign. He wanted to copy it and make a low-level imitation. But this way, he simply threw the consumables into the projection. This way, it would be an authorized high imitation, right? It was not that simple to duplicate the human-faced arachnid. Huang Bingzhen followed the methods of the order and collected the so-called consumables. They were merely of the lowest level. The current Wraith sign was too lazy to even glance at them. No matter how high an imitation was, it was just a likeness. Its functions were simplified, and its power was ordinary. But Luonan felt that it was enough. Not long after, a human-faced arachnid that was closer to the original form of the burning wraith floated in the air. In terms of efficiency, the Order's methods were far inferior. Aside from Luonan, no one could see the human-faced arachnid right now. The mental plane was endlessly deep and had many layers of structure. It was like layers upon layers of dark curtains. From the human-faced arachnid, it was the best hiding place. Even Cat Eyes, who specialized in perception, or even He Wayne and Bai Xinyan, would find it hard to reach the deeper regions. But Luonan's mental senses were able to probe the deeper regions from the very beginning. He was completely different from other people. Perhaps it was because his mental senses were purely for the sake of observation? Under the control of Luonan's consciousness, the low-level human-faced arachnid noiselessly infiltrated the void. Not long after, it followed the spiral arm of the galaxy and arrived at the edge of the surging dark cloud. The light of emotion still flickered within the dark cloud. Luonan thought back to last week. When he faced Jack, the Wraith sign had taken out a method that left a deep impression on him. The fellow had transformed into a piece of information, a bit of emotion. It had seeped into Jack's thoughts, pushing forward layer by layer, all the way to the depths of Jack's soul. Clearly, the human-faced arachnid had a similar instinct. Luonan did not have high expectations for the low-level version. It was fine as long as it could enter and transmit information. The human-faced arachnid swayed outside the dark cloud. It faced the light of emotion within the dark cloud and charged headfirst into it. Chapter 234. Luonan had no way of doing anything after the low-quality imitation human-faced arachnid entered the dark cloud. He could see how it operated on the level of human energy and information, but it was very difficult to operate it. It was the same as throwing a listening device inside. Whether or not it would be effective depended on a bit of luck. Right now, the spiral arm of the dark cloud was smeared with complex emotions. It was like a swaying poisonous mushroom, but it was not completely transparent. Luonan felt that it was still lacking a bit. He needed to wait. Luonan did not place all his hopes on the human-faced arachnid. His attention returned to Frost River reality. The battle between Fairchild and Bays was not that loud. Luonan often forgot about their existence. It was hard to imagine how these two experts, who were proficient in body techniques, fought. However, when the Galaxy Clairvoyance system was set up, it was impossible for Luonan to ignore it even if he wanted to. This was because the brightest cluster of stars was right there. This was a very interesting phenomenon. The most eye-catching constellation in Luonan's life sketch was that of Fairchild. Luonan wanted to successfully analyze Fairchild's super strength. It was an impossible task. However, Fairchild had revealed to Luonan the profundities of the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. Fairchild's body was grand and imposing. There was little concealment, so Fairchild's life sketch was clearly displayed. It was obviously impossible to simplify it to the level of cat eyes. However, its structure was complex and it lit up many stars. As a result, Luonan could sense an astonishing brightness and sense of existence amidst the splendid galaxy. It was because of Fairchild that the 8 Ablatum Nights, including Bays, were affected. The nebula dust that covered their bodies would be torn off from time to time, exposing some of the deeper mysteries. Luonan pondered. Through this, he could use it as a reference to pry into the Order of Justice's first ablatum. He just needed a bit more time. But at this time, He-Yuan issued a new order in the encrypted channel. 1 o'clock direction, 50 meters. Go through exit number 3. Luonan and the others, who had been moving forward, discovered that they had unknowingly arrived at another exit of Frost River reality. This exit was connected to the bearing building. They could enter Block B of the connected building from here. In other words, they would be able to leave this dangerous area that they had been in for a long time. Zhang Yingying, who was leading the way, couldn't help but say in the channel, "Hey, aren't there still 100 people who can't be saved?" He-Yuan replied, "The mission target is the Order's gunmen. Luonan already killed them all, okay? There are at least 10 people inside the 3 buildings. From the current intelligence, other than the Officiant and the Ablatum Knights, there were still 3 to 4 groups of people in the Order that were not under control. Yulan Hotel has confirmed that it's the sniper team. There are also operation teams in the 3 surrounding buildings." Zhang Yingying had been curious about this question for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, "What's the point of killing the gunmen? First Ablatums and Ablatum Knights are the real deal. The gunmen will cause more civilian casualties." Hey, you're saying that a secret-bound First Ablatum and 2 clear-sworn First Ablatums are no match for a few gunmen? For now, yes. After a few consecutive questions and answers, Zhang Yingying was very dissatisfied with He-Yuan's answers. Just as she was about to put in more effort, the Red Fox, who had not appeared in the encrypted channel for a long time, suddenly interjected. The direct interference of the mentally enhanced with the material plane is rather limited before becoming an extraordinary. The direct killing power of a mental storm may not be comparable to a metal bullet. And the First Ablatum's weapons are currently at Frost River reality. They are under Fairchild's control. This makes it very difficult for the First Ablatum's energy to deviate by a large margin. He-Yuan continued Red Fox's message. Right now, there are at least 30 to 50,000 citizens in the 3 buildings. These people can't take fright. If a stampede were to occur, the consequences would be unthinkable. To accomplish this, the gunmen just need to pull the trigger. And we can't afford to pay this price. Luonan had to admit that He-Yuan and Red Fox's words made some sense. However, the 2 of them had just been bickering with each other, and now they were singing the same tune. How could the other people, who had their own standpoints, endure this? Luonan was a bit embarrassed. Compared to He Wayne and Red Fox's train of thought, his thoughts were a bit too presumptuous. Even if he drew out the life sketches of the three first ablatums, it would not be of any substantial help in resolving the current situation. Then should he adjust and search for the gunman? But this would require a large increase in the precision of his senses. Luo Nan realized that he might not have this ability. While Luo Nan was thinking about his own conundrum, Zhang Yingying's thoughts were more practical. How long would it take to circle the 3 buildings? He Wayne answered as if it were a matter of course, we are only responsible for building B. The military will be responsible for buildings A and C. The encrypted channel was immediately shocked. Papercut asked, the military? The military is personally taking action? Oh right, that flying shuttle just now. Zhang Yingying also shouted, I knew it. How could there be such a coincidence? You were the one who gave the order to prove Ghost Thunder, right? Did you use your personal connections? He Wayne herself had a solid military background. This was no secret in the society. However, aside from her military accomplishments, she rarely displayed her personal connections during her time in the society. This sudden mention really caught people off guard. He Wayne did not immediately respond to this question. Zhang Yingying would not let her go. Hey, wouldn't bringing in the military complicate the situation? Secretary He Wayne was 2 seconds late. Then she said, it's official cooperation. He Wayne no longer paid attention to this topic. She directly said, enter building B in half a minute. Red Fox, Bamboo Pole, and Papercut are still responsible for Yulan. Pay attention. According to the requirements, we need to deal with the gunman within 300 seconds. A countdown interface was added to the encrypted channel at the same time the information was transmitted. Right now there were only 295 seconds left. The sudden addition of elements made everyone stunned. Papercut was faced with this unreasonable mission. He said in astonishment, we'll need more than this amount of time to run back. Right when he was doubtful, Red Fox turned around and left without a word. Bamboo Pole pulled him and sped up to catch up. It was as if Papercut had just woken up from a dream. He increased the force of his feet, but he still wanted to ask, it's not even 5 minutes. What if we can't do it? We'll implement the emergency plan in 285 seconds. It's impossible to predict what will happen when the time comes. Speed up. He Wayne urged the team to advance quickly. At the same time, she laid out the next steps of the operation. After Special Police Squadron 2 enters Building B, you will be responsible for guiding and maintaining order. Everyone else, with the floor you entered as the boundary, Mr. Luo, Yingying, and White Salt will form a team and head down. Cat Eyes and I will form a team and head up. Quickly search and deal with the gunmen. Contact them at any time. After 270 seconds, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, we will immediately descend from a high altitude and leave the range of the triangular building complex. Every time she mentioned the number of seconds, it was in coordination with the countdown interface. She reminded everyone that the arrangements were constantly consuming time. The group of people were doing their best to digest this information when He Wayne specifically said to Luo Nan, Mr. Luo, you must focus your energy. Don't get distracted. Luo Nan was stunned when he heard the hidden meaning in her words. But at this time, he faintly heard a piece of information. It seemed to be a sigh of regret, but it also seemed to be a mockery. Chapter 235. Luo Nan's mind suddenly slanted. This piece of information that had no head or tail did not originate from any member of the team. It did not seem to be directed at any member of the team either. It just soared through the air and reverberated within his mind. He was stupefied for a moment before realizing that there was progress on the human-faced arachnid side. He clairvoyantly observed the dark cloud above the spiral arm of the Star River. He could clearly feel that the density of the dark cloud was decreasing. More and more blurry starlight was reflected. There was even some energy information that was deciphered and analyzed through the human-faced arachnid. Those few words did not seem to be the real-time dynamic of a conversation. It was more like the intense obsession of a certain person's heart, causing the relevant information to grow and accelerate endlessly. It looked like the person within the dark cloud was in a bad mood. He raised his head to look up. Through the metal frame and the transparent glass ceiling, he could see the silhouette of the pitch-black and lightless tall building. It was vaguely similar to the dark cloud in his senses. In reality, the group of people were rushing towards a dark cloud. Moreover, it was the target that Luo Nan was targeting. The color of the light was constantly changing, nearly turning into a poisonous mushroom. Or maybe it was a coincidence. Luo Nan's gaze locked onto a corner of the building. He could not see any clues with his naked eye, but he could feel the malice hidden deep within the air on the mental plane. It grew clearer and clearer as he got closer. Even though He Wayne had warned him not to get distracted, what if he was under the interference of a first ablatum? Luo Nan sent a message in the encrypted channel. It seems like we're being watched. It's that fellow who talks too much. He Wayne's reply was filled with the flavor of a matter of course. As long as we're in one of the 3 buildings, we'll certainly be watched by at least one first ablatum. Don't worry. Don't get distracted. This was the second time He Wayne had warned him. Right now Luo Nan's feet were practically not touching the ground. He was being carried by Shuelei and Cat Eyes as they sprinted through the connecting passageway. Shuelei moved close to his ear and said, "You didn't arrange for me just now. You must follow Uncle." He Wayne suddenly asked before Luo Nan could finish speaking, "Has Shuelei already obtained the talisman? I just made small progress in the past 2 days." Shuelei was suddenly stunned. He turned his head to look. "You know?" He Wayne didn't respond. Instead, she issued another order in the encrypted channel. "Shuelei and Mr. Luo will be in a team. According to the time limit, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, you must quickly leave the vicinity of the building." Shuelei didn't say anything, but Xue Weiluan was startled. Just as he was about to speak, a message flashed through the encrypted channel. "Hey, Sister Nun, it seems like you're using awakened ones as your criteria. Is this some sort of arrangement by the Society?" The one who sent the message was by Xinyan, but there was no response from He Wayne. Xue Weiluan's words were blocked by this message. In the face of a completely unknown background, making wild guesses and suspicions was one of the worst things a special police officer could do. It was the same for his father's identity. At this time, the group of people had already entered Building B. The special police formation automatically dispersed. Cat Eyes flashed out of the group and stood together with He Wayne. Zhang Yingying pulled by Xinyan over. She grabbed Luo Nan and Shuelei. "Do you know why you need to concentrate?" The 2 high school students shook their heads. "What happens next will be very exciting." Zhang Yingying blinked. She was just about to say something when she saw Xue Weiluan walking over. She shut her mouth and walked to the side with Bai Xinyan. Luo Nan also hurriedly stepped aside, giving the father and son some time to talk. However, the conversation between the father and son of the Xue family was much more straightforward than they imagined. The 2 men, who were both equally majestic, hugged each other heavily. Even though there was a thick layer of exoskeleton armor between them, it didn't matter. "Do your best. Be careful." There wasn't much time to talk during the continuous countdown. Before their voices could fade away, the glass wall adjacent to the entrance shattered with a bang. The glass fragments flew down and a gale whistled in. Zhang Yingying looked down. "The slope is okay. It's not the straight up or down type." At that moment, Shuelei could feel his father's arms tightening around him. He grinned and broke free. "Don't worry." Zhang Yingying turned her head to look. "Shuelei has tried descending from a high building before?" Shuelei maintained his confident smile. "The gym master taught me the jumping ape technique. I've also practiced a bit of extreme parkour. I've tried it on a high floor, but the distance wasn't very long. Excellent. Zhang Yingying gave him a thumbs up. With a burden like Luonan, White Salt and I will definitely have to spend a large amount of energy on him. You need to be careful. It's time for a martial artist to crush a mentally enhanced dregs. Zhang Yingying was halfway through her words when a figure flashed by her side. He Yuang and Cat Eyes practically leaped up shoulder to shoulder. They braved the gale and leaped into the dark void. Their figures flipped and they flew up. They only left a message in the encrypted channel. Hurry up. They didn't have the chance to carefully plan due to the urgency of time. At this time, it depended on whether or not their daily habits were efficient. Right now, the power outage of the building and the elevator were out of service. They wanted to complete the entire journey in less than 4.5 minutes. According to the society's usual practice, they relied on the skills of ability users to play fast ascending and descending. He Yuan didn't choose Luonan to go up. This fellow's terrible physical skills were probably one of the important reasons. Zhang Yingying shrugged. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew from the moment He Yuan arranged the mission that the intensity of this group's mission was much easier. The specific plan of action naturally had to be sent to the encrypted channel. Luonan's sensing radius is 80 meters. Building B's width is around 150 meters. Just make a spiral around the building. If everything goes smoothly, we only need 100 seconds to set foot on Fudong Main Street. Luonan was astonished. That's fast. I won't be able to lock onto the gunman in time. The terrain and angle of the lower floors are meaningless. The possibility of a gunman is too small. The secretary just wants us to retreat. Are you ready? Me and the big guy will go first. Shuelei shuddered. The confident smile on his face was a bit stiff. But no matter what, he couldn't let others, especially his father, see this. It would only cause him to worry. He silently recited the mnemonic that the gym master had personally taught him. Transform the water and fire into a discipline. He began to encourage himself. I'm different from normal people. I'm really different. Chen Xiaolin's face miraculously flashed in his mind. Then it dissipated like a bubble. The yin and yang within his body rose and fell. His body, which had been eroded by the gale within the darkness, recovered its warmth. The little bit of hesitation and absent-mindedness melted away into nothing. Shuelei was even more certain that he was born for this sort of scene. He tilted his head slightly and locked gazes with Luonan beside him. This was the friend who had drawn him into this wonderful world. The two punched each other. Let's go. As Shuelei shouted, he leaped into the dark void outside. Zhang Yingying also leaped out of the building at practically the same time as him. Then came Bai Xinyan, who was holding onto Luonan's waist with one arm. Shui Weiluan followed closely behind them. He stuck his head out to look and just happened to see his son. His son was more agile than any ape or monkey. His long arm slapped the glass wall a few times to borrow strength. It was as if he was riding a skateboard as he flew all the way down. Several figures quickly disappeared into the curtain of night. Chapter 236. At the center of the rooftop of Building B, a gear-like structure hummed as it revolved. It constructed an intricate and marvelous formation. Rays of light weaved together like a cocoon, wrapping Enchungli within. With this layer of cover, Enchungli could no longer hide his ashen face. He ground his teeth heavily. His thoughts were completely on the building beneath his feet. He was on the damned members of the society who made him feel as if his heart and lungs were on fire. As a sworn first ablatum, he could be considered a mentally enhanced in a certain sense. However, his mental senses were never his forte. He needed to use the divination domain to lock onto a target several hundred meters away, separated by several dozen layers of reinforced concrete. However, as long as his consciousness existed in the divine play domain, for a moment, Anwang's evaluation seemed to linger in his mind. How unsightly! And Wang's words were as light and subtle as usual. They were worth pondering. But this time, the most superficial meaning was enough to make Cheng-Li feel as if he had been slapped in the face. His entire face was wooden. He stood within the magic array, but he felt as if he was imprisoned in a cage. The gazes of the surrounding people turned extremely strange. Actually, the priests and members of the order were far from being able to access information from the divination domain. It was very difficult for them to know what the first ablatums were doing and what they were communicating with each other. However, Cheng-Li still felt terrible. He had a feeling that Wang's words had spread far and wide. Correspondingly, his performance as the judge personally appointed by Wang had spread far and wide. This was completely different from what he had imagined. He had never thought that this half-grown child named Luonan would be so thorny. Other things aside, Luonan's soul strength was extremely thick. Most importantly, it formed its own system. The so-called format pyramid appeared to be illusory and indistinct, but it was like a layer of irritating curtains. It acted as a buffer for penetrating power on the mental plane. Cheng-Li had tried to use his power time and time again, but he wasn't confident that he would succeed in one strike. He could only keep accumulating power. He hesitated for a long time, waiting for the military to activate the ghost bomb with great difficulty. Cheng-Li then took advantage of this opportunity. He used the Ablatum Knight as a carrier to find an opportunity to kill the enemy in one strike. But who would have thought that just as the accumulated power was about to take effect, it was chopped off by that damned secretary. He himself suffered a backlash and his soul was shaken. He still hadn't calmed down. The most damned thing was that Luonan and his secretary had mocked him by name after the fact. And this was a one-sided situation where they had guessed correctly about his identity. A great humiliation. If this matter were to spread, then he, Cheng-Li, would become an eternal laughingstock in Xia City and even in the Order of Justice. He would never be able to survive. At this moment, Cheng-Li only wanted to avenge his humiliation. The people from the association had already passed through the connecting passageway and entered Building B. Building B was good. He was in Building B. There were 3 connected buildings. The height of the buildings was around 700 meters. They were connected to Frost River reality in the center. Following the arrival of Luonan's group, the straight-line distance between the two sides had already shrunk to less than 400 meters. The enemy had even divided their forces. A heaven-sent opportunity. Cheng-Li began to mobilize the power of the divination domain. However, just as he started, Wang's thoughts cut in and seized all the authority of the divination domain. The projection of the scales of truth in the center of the Great Triangle forcefully attracted the attention of every officiator. The position of the white scale on the classical pendulum scale was lifted up by a bit, and the black scale correspondingly fell down. It looked like the state of imbalance had been corrected. The winding and rotating posture of the kite on the black scale was more lively than it was at the beginning. This showed that the ritual had made great progress. Cheng-Li was shocked at first when his authority was seized, but his face burned when he saw this scene. It was reasonable to say that Wang had personally appointed him to judge Luonan with the ultimate goal of breaking the order that Luonan had formed. He wanted to release the elements of pain and chaos and make the scales of truth reach equilibrium. Now that there was great progress, Cheng-Li should be happy. But the problem was, how much of this was due to him? Cheng-Li had been affected by the secretary's decapitation, and most of the power he had accumulated had been dissipated. Although he had frightened the citizens of Frost River reality out of their wits, the chaotic elements of the 100 or so people couldn't be considered a weight at all. What truly affected the scales of truth was the panic of the surrounding citizens caused by the power outage of the 3 buildings. And the reason for all this was because Wang had given an order to the action team. He hadn't used any supernatural powers. Cheng-Li felt that Wang was a fool when he compared the two. However, and Wang wasn't too satisfied with the current situation. It's still a bit lacking. Perhaps I've placed too much of a foundation on the scales of truth. I still need to make up for it. Jing Xiao, who was on the other side of the building, really wanted to ask just what was the foundation that An Wang had placed. But at this time, An Chengli, who was anxious to save face, couldn't wait to say, "Leave it to me, An Wang. This time, I will definitely get rid of those people from the society. You only have one chance, child." An Wang's thoughts were gentle and firm. Only those familiar with him knew that the deepest layer of his thoughts was a callousness akin to an iceberg at the bottom of the sea. Mending the pen after the sheep is lost is not a flock of sheep, but a fence. Its purpose is none other than order. As An Wang spoke, the scene under the projection of the scales of truth quickly changed. It swept over a dense crowd. These people were scattered across the 3 connected buildings. Because of the sudden darkness, they were bewildered and uneasy. However, as time passed, human instincts to adapt to the environment came into play. The convenient and efficient information system of modern society was also the embodiment of rules and order. As the government sent targeted information to all the trapped citizens and instructed them to evacuate, the panic of the people gradually subsided. Tens of thousands of citizens were evacuated from the fire escape and emergency evacuation exit. In modern metropolises, high-rise commercial buildings were often connected by high-altitude stairs and conveyor belt. They were like long vines that extended and entangled in a primeval forest. This also made it convenient for evacuation during emergencies. At this time, people were flowing out of these tunnels like ants. Due to the proper distribution of information, the overall situation was quite stable. However, this also caused the imbalance of the scales of truth to become more serious. Seeing the white scales move down again, not to mention Jing Xiao, even An Chengli, who hadn't been very focused all this time, couldn't help but divert some of his attention. If the imbalance couldn't be transformed into a balanced state, it meant that the spellcasting had failed. The 3 of them would suffer a serious backlash. This was much more tragic than the one caused by the secretary earlier. One order, one world. An Wang sighed softly. I like order. Order is the brightest path to the truth. But sometimes we must abandon the low-level parts and replace them with the high-level part. To use the low-level world as a ladder to the high-level world. An Wang. Jing Xiao felt that something was wrong. An Wang's request to cut off the power to the 3 buildings was very inappropriate. And according to what An Wang had just said, wasn't it a step further? A step further? What step was it? An Wang's response was clear. Before order, there must be disorder. New birth must be accompanied by destruction. Before the thought was extinguished, a dazzling radiance exploded within Frost River reality. The shockwave instantly flattened the glass wall on one side. 7 or 8 human silhouettes scattered amidst the flying shards of glass that filled the sky. They were thrown towards the 3 connected buildings. Chapter 237. An Wang. Jing Zhao's thoughts trembled. His emotions were panicked. He wanted to yell at An Wang, "We've completely crossed the line." Everything that had happened before could be explained by the fact that they had no regard for the civilians during the fierce battle with Fairchild. They could even make a countercharge by saying that the enemy's choice of battlefield was unprofessional. This was a common occurrence. But if they stubbornly insisted on doing things their own way, directly tearing apart the bottom line of the government's social governance, they would blindly terrorize and expand. How would they be any different from the vagrant organizations in the wilderness? If they truly angered the Star Alliance Committee or even the local powers, many parties would unite to denounce them. Even the First Ablatum Assembly would find it difficult to absolve them. An Wang. An Chengli was also panicking. His thoughts were similar to Jing Zhao's, but he was even more advanced. Once the matter was investigated, An Wang was old and experienced. He did not care about anything. The Ablatum Knights only needed to carry out the mission. Those gunmen might not even be able to keep their lives. In the end, only he and Jing Xiao would be left to bear the blame. And with his previous terrible performance, it was very likely that he would suffer even more losses. No matter how uncomfortable Zheng Xiao and Enchengli felt, the situation would not return to zero. As gunfire wildly pulsed in the darkness, the truly terrifying Ablatum Knights frantically accelerated atop the triangular spaceship. They leaped into the air, their targets the three surrounding buildings. The intense light exploded behind them. The chaotic red and blue lights of the police lights interweaved together, foretelling the chaotic scene that was to follow. This was not a diversion, nor was it an expansion of the battlefield. It was purely a destruction. It was very likely that it would be an unbridled destruction. Baze. And Chungli believed that he still had a bit of friendship with Baze. He could not help but contact the other side. He wanted to understand just what sort of arrangements and Wang had made. He knew that this was meaningless, but if he did not understand this, he would simply suffocate. However, Baze did not respond. When Enchengli tried to continue calling out, his scalp tightened. It was as if his consciousness had suddenly fallen into a layer of ice. He could not send out any thoughts. Baze is currently much busier than you. Why don't you do something more meaningful? For example, maintain silence? And Wang's thoughts flowed within the evolution field. He became the master of everything, and Chungli could only shrink into a corner like a decorative pillar. The exchange of thoughts only lasted for a short moment. At this time, the jumping gunfire inside the building was still imprinted in many people's pupils. But then, the trajectory of bullets from other directions tore through the night sky, penetrated the glass curtain wall, and blasted the figure holding the gun into pieces. Even earlier than that, the gunshots from Block B were only echoes. The evolution field faithfully transmitted these changes back, forming an image. Secretary. And Chungli saw the enemy he had just made. In addition, in Building A and Building C, snipers from either the military or the police had instantly killed the gunman, as well as sniper robots that had infiltrated the building at some point in time. No one could pull the trigger a second time. Those brainwashed gunmen were originally abandoned pawns, so it was normal for them to die. However, the loss of these few lives proved a very bad fact. The government, the military, and the association were working together. Perhaps the military's assault team, or even the Deep Blue Walkers, were already on their way in a place where they couldn't see. Unwung, things have gotten out of hand. And Chungli couldn't help but roar. But at this time, his body suddenly quivered. The rapidly increasing chaos element caused the projection of the scales of truth to lean more and more toward a balanced state. It instantly crossed an important node, causing the power of the holy artifact to begin to be projected toward the three spellcasters. The function of the evolution field had advanced. The thoughts of the three first ablatums converged in a certain sense. And Chungli still did not have any authority, but at least he had become more sensitive. He could sense that the Krite was attempting to absorb even more chaos element on the black plate. That thing was indeed growing. However, there was interference. There seemed to be an invisible sieve under the night sky. Someone was attempting to gather this chaotic region, or at least bestow a unique order upon this region. The image within the evolution field continuously switched, sweeping over all the members of the society. This included the secretary that Enchengli paid special attention to, as well as Luonan, who was about to land. Enchengli noticed that the teenager was currently looking up at the sky. His expression of astonishment was extremely obvious. He should have been startled by the intense changes. The problem was that his gaze was not directed at the ceiling of Frost River reality where the Ablatum Knights were soaring. Instead, it was directed at a higher altitude. "It's him. It's that kid." And Chungli blurted out. Actually, he did not know whether or not Luonan was the problem. However, the thought of using someone else to do his dirty work was enough for him to express this sort of judgment. and Wang did not respond. Then the image switched, proving that he did not care about Enchungli's judgment at all. The image was focused on the sky above Frost River reality. This enormous triangular spaceship had become a tattered biscuit that had its insides hollowed out due to the collision between Baze and Fairchild. The 7 Ablatum Knights had already leaped away from this place. Their speeds were fast, and they had already collided with the outer glass curtain wall of the building. The ceiling was completely empty. There was nothing there. But soon, the integrated image of information inexplicably shook for a moment. Wondrous ripples even blossomed in the evolution field at that location. It was not an illusion. And Chungli's eyelids twitched. Slight distortions appeared on the magical array constructed from high-energy light beams around his body. Correspondingly, the flow of energy that was originally as smooth as water formed a vortex out of thin air. It was just that the operation of the magical array had nearly entered a fork in the road. While Enchungli was distracted, the image displayed by the evolution field switched once more. It pointed at the first of the Ablatum Knights to charge up the building. Enchungli remembered that this fellow was Flying Shark. His speed underwater and in the air was first-rate among this group of people. The force of his charge was very strong, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. There was a boom as the enormous glass curtain wall was smashed into pieces by Flying Shark. That fellow must have locked onto the direction before he exerted his strength. There were 20 to 30 citizens who did not have the time to evacuate behind this piece of glass. Flying Shark's extraordinary power was poured into every piece of glass shard that flew everywhere. The fate of those unlucky bastards was probably the same as being shot by a shotgun. The first wave. Enchungli could already foresee the scene of blood flowing like a river. However, what appeared in the evolution field next was not flying flesh and blood. It was not miserable wails. It was just streaks of distorted flowing light. Then there was nothingness. Where is he? Enchungli's thoughts froze for a moment. After a moment, the glass curtain wall shattered one after another. The Ablatum Knights landed on the building one after another. However, they were faced with an incomprehensible emptiness. There was not a single shadow within the entire building as far as the eye could see. The Krite materialized in the projection of the scales of truth stiffened. Soon after, it melted into the smoke of the plate. The black plate rose up all the way to the top. Correspondingly, the white plate on the other side heavily pressed down. Chapter 238. Luonan and the others had just stepped onto the side road of Fudong Main Street when the shockwave enveloped the area around Frost River reality. Just as Zhang Yingying had expected, there were no gunmen on the lower floors. The journey down was easy and pleasant, and it took them less than 100 seconds. They even had the time to think about it a little more. With the shadow of the building, they could quietly descend so as not to be too shocking. However, the actions of the Ablatum Knights above Frost River reality made their cautiousness a joke. Just what is he doing? When Zhang Yingying saw the shockwave that exploded within Frost River reality and the figure that flew out, her usually jumpy train of thought was somewhat unable to hold on. There was nothing strange about a few gunmen dying right after they opened fire and getting rid of them cleanly. Compared to the few Ablatum Knights, they were not even worth a fart. If I had known that this would be the result, I wouldn't have been so hesitant. I would have just taken action. That's for sure, and Wang's brain has already atrophied. Hiss. Zhang Yingying suddenly covered her ears and frowned. Half of Luonan's brain was stupefied a bit earlier than her. This was probably the most intense tinnitus he had ever felt in his entire life. It rang loudly, making him suspect that someone had fired a gun right next to his ear. He also covered his ears and couldn't help but grimace. What happened? Shuelei was originally immersed in the successful high-altitude rapid descent experience, but he was given a fright by Luonan's desperate reaction. Bai Xinyan glanced at the two of them, then lowered her head to look at her wristband. She then shrugged. There's a problem with the encrypted channel. On the screen of her wristband, the countdown stopped at 97 seconds. It's the collapse of the psychic wave network. Zhang Yingying recovered from the initial shock and patted her ear lightly. She had a strange look on her face. I haven't had this symptom for a long time. Is the president doing some extreme experiments again? This is the mission process. Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped talking. At this time, Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward the end of the auxiliary road. Shuelei was a bit hesitant. He raised his head to look with uncertainty. In the end, Luo Nan recovered from his tinnitus state with great difficulty. He blurted out the most crucial words. Where is he? In this instant, the brilliant river of stars that Luo Nan used clairvoyance to illuminate was silently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. There were only a few dozen stars left, as well as the nebula dust that was even harder to see. Such a strong contrast caused Luo Nan to be stupefied in place. At this time, Zhang Yingying grabbed his arm to make sure that the two of them were a little closer. Then, she looked at Bai Xinyan, and the few of them carefully walked out of the side road. At this time, the night rain had not stopped. The police lights were on, the street lights were on, and the public transport vehicles were also on. Only the buildings behind them were pitch black. The contrast between light and darkness was strong. However, regardless of whether it was in the light or in the dark, there was not a single person within their line of sight. The entire street, the entire building complex, and even the blurry city under the curtain of rain were all empty and devoid of life. If there were strong people, they would be the Ablatum Knights who had just shattered the glass curtain wall. There was also Frost River reality, where Fairchild and Bays had suddenly engaged in a direct and violent confrontation. There was also the first Ablatum and his subordinates within the three dark clouds at the top of the building. These people took the form of constellations, nebula dust, and appeared on the plane of Luo Nan's mental clairvoyance. Compared to the vast and resplendent star river from before, the sparseness was shocking. Oh, I made a mistake. An inexplicable voice penetrated into Luo Nan's mind, and then the background noise suddenly became rich. A ripple seemed to streak past Luo Nan's eyes. He let out a cry, and his entire body seemed to be electrified. His vision blurred, and the dense starlight and the gloomy void transformed back and forth several times. Only then did it stabilize and return to its normal state of the brilliant star river. However, there were some subtle differences. On the plane of reality, a dense mass of people appeared out of thin air. They rubbed shoulders with one another as they hurried past, submerging the small team of 4. Most of the people were far away from this area. They occasionally turned their heads to look at the pitch-black building, revealing expressions of confusion and suspicion. This was the scene that should have happened in reality. But what was that just now? Hey, did you see that? Those Ablatum Knights. They're gone. Zhang Yingying's voice suddenly lowered. It was a bit hoarse. There's also Fairchild and Bays. Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward Frost River reality. There, the impact of the battle had strangely disappeared without a trace. All that was left was the broken outer wall of the building. Luo Nan added in his mind, and the 3 first Ablatums on the top of the building. They're on the other side. Bai Xinyan muttered to herself for a few seconds before speaking softly. It's like a legendary technique like spatial fault. They can intercept a segment of space-time and replicate it. Or they can use the projection of the world. I've only heard that there are some extraordinaries who flaunt themselves as gods who possess this sort of nearly inexplicable space-time ability. Spatial fault? Zhang Yingying had heard of this for a long time, but it was mostly in the works of fantasy. She could only spread her hands. Right now, the only known extraordinary in the entire city is the president. The gazes of the two beauties, each with their own characteristics, locked. Zhang Yingying subconsciously reached out to touch her ear. The encrypted channel had yet to be restored, and the chaos of the psychic wave network continued. However, as long as one wanted to understand the situation, one could still use the primitive method of using a wristband. Zhang Yingying began to make calls. She wanted to find someone to clarify things. Fault. Luo Nan, who was next to her, naturally heard the conversation between the two women. He blinked, and his consciousness flowed, permeating through the void. The brilliant star river of his clairvoyance was still the same as before. There seemed to be nothing abnormal. However, after the experience he had just experienced, the greatest abnormality was that there was nothing abnormal. Due to the appearance of the spatial fault, the Ablatum Knights, Fairchild, the three first Ablatums, and the other members of the Order of Justice were all swallowed up. These people no longer existed on the plane of reality. Regardless of whether or not this was the work of that person, this change should be reflected in Luo Nan's mental senses. It was just like when he first entered the spatial fault and instantly sensed the change. However, the reality was that regardless of whether it was Fairchild's magnificent and dazzling constellation, the nebula dust of Bays and the other 8 Ablatum Knights, or the dark cloud formed by the 3 first Ablatums, all of them remained within the star atlas. There was just an additional layer of indescribable layers. The reason for this was that although Luo Nan's body had come out, his consciousness, or at least a portion of it, remained within the spatial fault. Carried out the work he was most familiar with, observation. Luo Nan was simultaneously observing 2 worlds. They were independent of each other, yet they overlapped with each other. A brand new dimension was opened within the 3-dimensional structure of clairvoyance. It was a feeling that defied all human experience. It could only be sensed, but it could not be described. It was extremely bizarre, yet brilliant beyond compare. This was especially true when the 2 worlds, which appeared to be completely identical, overlapped with each other in reality. This gave Luo Nan an additional angle of observation. The dark cloud of dust, which was originally chaotic and unclear, became much clearer. Even though it was still difficult to refine a life sketch in the form of a constellation, it was still possible to draw an outline that was not too different from each other. It was more distinguishable from each other. And so, the dark cloud that affected observation gradually thinned and split apart, revealing the true faces of the 3 first Ablatums of the Order of Justice. Soon, Luo Nan found the one with the highest status. It was an old man wearing loose robes. He stood in the middle of the landing platform of Building A. His figure was thin and withered. He looked old and clumsy. Needless to say, this was Wang. Although he was trapped within the spatial fault, this old man did not show any signs of anxiety. He just smiled and sighed with emotion. Doing things that ordinary people are unable to do is called extraordinary. Ouyang, compared to you, I really am old and decrepit. Wang, you praise me too much. As Wang spoke, a middle-aged man appeared on the rooftop of the building Wang was in. He wore a black suit that seemed like he was about to attend a banquet. He stood about 10 meters away from the century-old man and bowed slightly to show courtesy. Chapter 239. Ouyang? President Ouyang Chen. Luo Nan finally understood He Yuan's meaning. No wonder she didn't consider the strong members of the order at all. So she was waiting here. He had never truly seen Ouyang Chen before, but he had heard of this division president who taught ability users with the theory of internal logic, invented the hexayer, and established the psychic wave network. Ouyang Chen's name reverberated like thunder in his ears. Now that he saw Ouyang Chen face to face, he felt that Ouyang Chen's image was quite consistent with his expectations. He didn't feel unfamiliar at all. Wang and Ouyang Chen were even more familiar with each other. They had both been in Xia City for many years, keeping each other in check. The number of interactions between the two was even greater than the number of members and followers they had. This old man, who was already over 100 years old, raised his head to look at the night sky, which was no different from before. He muttered, "The logic world. I remember that you once discussed a similar concept with me." I was asking for guidance. Ouyang Chen was still modest and low-key. But I refused. And Wang reminisced about the past and was rather emotional. Clergy and researchers are the same. They both yearn for the truth, but we won't place holy objects on the experimental table. We will always have a forbidden zone. Reverence or fear. In short, we must avoid it. But researchers are different. You can trample on the holy domain at any time. Ouyang Chen listened quietly, not refuting. But as an extraordinaire, just by standing there, he made everyone on the landing pad, other than An Wang, feel uneasy. Actually, when An Wang and Ouyang Chen's conversation was transmitted to the other two first ablatums through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao and Enchungli reacted, as if they had swallowed a bomb. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and Enchungli groaned. This guy came out of the laboratory. He must have crossed the line. Oh shit. An Wang laughed. Ouyang, my children don't understand you. They don't understand your work. Ouyang Chen's gaze flitted across the complex light diagram around An Wang's body. Just like An Wang, he raised his head to look at the sky, deep in thought. He did not immediately respond. An Wang quickly withdrew his gaze. He was like an old friend, a senior, analyzing Ouyang Chen's actions. You have never been an inventor. You are a theoretical researcher. You grasp a question, and you will research around it until you form a valuable system. For example, when you set up the psychic wave network, others only saw the convenience, but I knew that you were researching the soul, researching mental energy, and researching the existence of the mental plane relative to the material plane. You wanted to figure out where the power that distorted reality came from. Ouyang Chen looked at the old man's mottled face and replied calmly, "This is what I've been pursuing. According to your church, it is the source of the world's revolution." Oh yes, the gate of truth is open. The fact that An Wang had so easily said the keywords made the two first ablatums' scalps tense. Was it really this old man who had not hesitated to shed all pretense of cordiality with child and pushed for the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Tsang in the dark? I feel like we are all a joke. On Zheng Zhao's side, Enchungli once again contacted him through a private line. There's definitely something wrong with that old man's brain capacity. Or perhaps he simply doesn't take us seriously. We should think of a way. Zheng Xiao suddenly could not hear anything. This private line of communication had been inexplicably severed. At the same time, an ice-cold and penetrating intent cut through his nerves within the evolution field, slowly grinding them away. And Chungli's situation would only be worse than his. Zheng Xiao closed his eyes and then opened them again. There was no doubt that the old man had always known about this private line of communication between him and Chungli. He just turned a blind eye and let them play around. Perhaps Zheng Xiao should rejoice. Even in private communication, he had never spoken ill of An Wang out of caution. But at this moment, he was not only worried that the old man would dig up old debts, but he was also unable to understand why An Wang had suddenly expressed his attitude in such a frank manner. What was the meaning behind this? Unbeknownst to him, Zheng Zhao's attention turned to the core of the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth. The unbalanced state continued, but Zheng Xiao noticed that the white plate, which had been pressed down to the bottom, had lifted a little at some unknown time. The crite that had materialized on the black plate had also begun to recover its vitality. Then, where was the opposing chaotic element? Zheng Xiao seemed to understand something in a daze, but the pressure on the mental plane had risen once again. It was ice-cold and heavy, making it impossible for his thoughts to go any deeper. The conversation between An Wang and Ouyang Chen was as warm as a spring breeze. No matter what, I can feel your accomplishments. Ouyang, you are attempting to redefine the laws of the material plane. Ouyang Chen shook his head slightly. If such a form truly exists, I hope that it can be reproduced. But up until now, all I have been able to do is create a plausible model, a tiny instance. At the very least, this is a battlefield where I can freely move my hands and feet. It is enough to reduce the impact on the secular world. Look, Fairchild and the others are having fun fighting. While Wang was speaking, Frost River Reality was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the two powerhouses. The connection between Frost River Reality and Building A broke. A large half of the structure fell down. Fairchild and Baze's figures flew up at nearly the same time, smashing into Building A's body. Immediately, an even more powerful shockwave swept out. The glass walls of over 10 floors above and below were shattered with a loud rumble. Glass flew down like rain, and the entire building seemed to shake. If this was the plane of reality, the casualties of the surrounding citizens would be in the hundreds or thousands. But now there was not a single person in the building. Even if it was completely demolished, it would not matter. The only thing they had to worry about was the church members on the rooftop. The confrontation between Fairchild and Baze grew more and more intense. Although Wang had taken the initiative to bring it up, his gaze was focused on Ouyang Chen for the majority of the time. He was extremely focused. Wang? It really is a very good design. Wang stared at Ouyang Chen and nodded slightly. You have maintained a very high degree of independence. You are mostly borrowing the existing objects of the material plane. The consumption is not much and the pressure you endure is not great. It is hard to imagine that this is a flawed product. Ouyang Chen smiled in response. So the possibility of it collapsing due to overload is very small. Wang does not need to think in this direction. Wang could not help but laugh when his thoughts were exposed in a single sentence. Ouyang, since you clearly know that this is an unsuccessful work, why don't you continue researching it? Stay in your laboratory and concentrate on it. Ignore the disturbances of society and let it proceed according to the established method. Wang, I am doing it according to the established method. Chapter 240. The rooftop was silent for a few seconds. Wang began to shake his head. Ouyang, your current appearance is far from being as convincing as the results of your experiment. Ouyang Chen maintained his gaze. Wang, other than the teachings of your religion, no one can feel your sincerity. Wang's shriveled mouth opened wide. His surprisingly neat and pure white teeth cracked open into a crack. A low and hoarse laugh came from within. This is nothing. The affairs of the world are not driven by our exchanges. The decisive element is not truth or lies. It lies in the established facts. Ouyang, from the moment you establish the logic world, Xia City will not operate because of our attitudes. Do you want to make a bet? Ouyang Chen seriously considered it for a while. In the end, he sighed silently. I've only cut off the channel to gather chaos elements. I thought that the people at the first level of your order's first ablatums had already abandoned methods such as sacrificial sacrifice. Wang was still fine when these words were spoken, but the other two first ablatums on the rooftops of the other two skyscrapers looked as if they had been hit in the head with a stick. Jing Xiao was speechless. He already had a premonition, but he was just suppressing it. Now that he was clear-headed, the impact was much smaller. And Chengli was the one who had truly been hit awake. He cried out involuntarily, "What sacrificial sacrifice?" And Chengli's telepathic thoughts had already cut into the evolution field before his voice faded away. He had never been an idiot. It was just that the consecutive setbacks in a short period of time had caused his mind to not be clear. He received Ouyang Chen's reminder and looked at the changes in the projection of the scales of truth. The crucial point that he had overlooked before finally appeared clearly. We are in a spatial fault. The two worlds are separated. There are no more panicking citizens. Where does the element of chaos come from? How could he have forgotten such a simple logic? And Chengli's gaze swept over his bewildered subordinate. He then looked at the diagram of light outside his body. Cold sweat poured down Chengli's body. He wanted to reach out, but he discovered that he was still under Wang's punitive restraint. He could not even move a finger. But at the same time, the power contained within his body was tightly combined with the diagram of light outside his body. Layer by layer, it was extracted and flowed into the evolution field. Since he was casting a spell, consumption was a must. In addition, Anchungli had suffered a backlash earlier, so he felt rather weak. He wasn't too sensitive to the loss of strength in his body. It was also because of this that he did not realize that the amount of power he had extracted recently had already far exceeded what was required for normal spellcasting. Over half of the magic power he had accumulated over the years had unknowingly been extracted. Without a doubt, all of this power had become the weights on the scales of truth to correct that damned unbalanced state. More than half of the power had been lost, but the speed of extraction was still increasing. Anchungli couldn't help but curse, "Old man, you're crazy." As the curses rang out, light and shadow fluctuated between the three buildings. The evolution field went from formless to tangible. It appeared in the void, revealing everything. The rest of the symbols and images were nothing. Everyone's attention was focused on the giant scale in the center. The black and white plates, one above and one below, revealed the crucial imbalance in front of everyone's eyes. It could be seen that even though the current situation was still white below black above, the trend was that the white plate was slowly rising while the black plate was slowly sinking. The difference in weight between the two sides was gradually leveling out. Of course, the price was the loss of power from Anchungli, Zhengxiao, and even Enwang. "Why did you choose me? Why did you choose me?" Anchungli was unwilling to accept this. The sacrifice of the spellcaster would certainly be shared by all three of them. But the current trend was that he would be the first to fall. Why? It must be known that he was Enwang's grandnephew. He was younger and had a brighter future ahead of him. He couldn't compare to Enwang, but he should at least be a bit stronger than Zhengxiao, right? Was it because he wasn't a good judge? Was it because he wasn't able to get rid of Luonan? As Anchungli was struggling with all his might, Zheng Zhao's telepathic thoughts cut through the evolution field. "Enwang, just what kind of substrate did you choose?" Anchungli suddenly shuddered, as if he had just woken up from a dream. Yes, who was the substrate? The substrate that had never appeared on the white plate was the one that determined the upper limit of the element of chaos. If the problem with that substrate was lower than the combined power of the three first ablatums, then Anchungli could definitely save it. Just as this thought arose, the image within the evolution field switched. What appeared should be a certain place within the building. That place had just been flattened by the shock waves of the collision. Fairchild wore a white robe that was still spotless. On the other hand, Baze, who was stronger than Fairchild, was like a runaway rhinoceros. His body was flung into the air as he charged at high speed. He smashed through the glass curtain wall and fell toward the bottom of the building. Baze would not die from the fall from this height, but it was destined that it would be very difficult for Baze to tangle with Fairchild for the time being. As for the other Ablatum Knights, without Baze as a shield, charging forward was meaningless. Fairchild raised his head and looked up. The evolution field just happened to give him a close-up. This Ablatum Knight clearly sensed the attention of the evolution field. His gray eyes turned to the side and pointed at the dusky void outside the building. His figure suddenly rose in the next moment. He leaped out of the window, stepped on the building, and flew straight up. It would not take him much time to reach the top of the building. Truth above. Whether it was the furious and panic-stricken Anchungli or the relatively calm Zhengxiao, the two first ablatums nearly suffocated after confirming Enwang's intentions. An uncontrollable despair engulfed their souls. It was Fairchild, the powerhouse who was just below extraordinary. He was the target that Enwang had found. Of the three first ablatums, the strongest was Enwang. However, he was already old. No matter how powerful his mental cultivation was, his fleshly body could collapse at any time. The remaining two added together might not even be able to compare to Enwang. Purely in terms of blood energy, Could Tu and Wang compare to the ears of truth? Clearly, they could not. Since that was the case, if they could not gather enough chaos element, the unbalanced state of the scales of truth would truly suck them dry. When that time came, the first one to die would be Enchantment. No, no. Enchantment's mind was restless. His strength was drained even faster. He tried to call out to his subordinate. Seeing his current crazed appearance, there really were a few trusted aides who wanted to rush over to help. But halfway there, Wang sighed. He extended his hand from his voluminous sleeves and used his thumb and forefinger to form a triangle. His other 6 fingers crisscrossed to form a seal that corresponded to the evolution field. It doesn't matter if you're stupid. What makes you feel helpless is to expose yourself without the slightest scruple. And Cheng-Li's mouth gaped wide open. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Just as his eyes were about to tear out, the evolution field's hidden defensive mechanism silently activated. Rays of light crisscrossed over the bodies of several of Cheng-Li's trusted aides. Dark flames rumbled and ignited. From the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside, they burned through these people. Yet they could not die quickly. Their hands and feet danced amidst their wretched screams. They fused their terror and despair into the flames. The flames reflected in their companions' eyes and penetrated deep into their hearts. The evolution field clearly displayed this scene. The flames soared, but it was as cold as ice. The priests and knights of the order were frozen on the spot. And Wang did not say it clearly, but the meaning behind his words was very clear. The 3 first ablatums added together were no match for Fairchild. But if they used an even more intense method and used even more people to burn their offerings, wouldn't that be enough? On the projection of the scales of truth, the plate was still moving at a leisurely pace. The element of chaos continued to accumulate, but should he hope that it would slow down a bit? Or should it speed up a bit? At this moment, Cheng-Li was truly at a loss as to what to do. He followed the instincts of a first ablatum and prayed to the order's sacred object. But Wang was above him like a black cloud covering his head. All he received was an emptiness of despair. Who will save me? As long as I can live, anyone is fine. And Cheng-Li's body stiffened. His consciousness gradually froze. Only a tiny bit of will to live remained amidst the fear and despair. It was like a flickering flame that continued to struggle. The icy darkness slowly descended. The flame slowly sank, growing weaker and weaker. But when the flame squeezed into the depths of his soul and released its final rays of light and heat in despair, it reflected a strange figure that seemed familiar. Chapter 241. And Wang maintained the special triangular hand seal. Dark flames burned within the triangular cavity, spreading to his palms, upper arms, and gradually covering his chest and abdomen, all the way to his head. He did not look like a piece of charcoal. Instead, he used a more economical method to extract the essence energy from his flesh and blood bit by bit. He ignited it to unleash 120% of his energy. And Wang was like this. Jing Xiao was more or less the same. With Cheng-Li blocking in front of him, he could maintain his calm for now. But the calmer he was, the more confused he became. For this reason, he used the evolution field to ask Wang, "Is there a need for this? Aren't we just paving the way for the order to enter Xia City on a large scale? Are we still unable to gain trust at this level? Do we really need to sacrifice the lives of a few first ablatums?" And Wang's answer was elusive and hard to fathom. Cheng-Li, this child, only has a clear mind when he is hiding behind someone else. When he spoke of the gate of truth, he asked when and where. This is correct. Only clear concrete information can be considered fundamental. However, the order lacks this right now. So, Wang, you want to verify it? Everything you've done is actually to find this thing that might not even exist? In the end, the order has never verified it, right? Jing Xiao was unable to continue controlling his emotions. Anyone would find it hard to maintain their calm when they discovered that their life might be squandered on a meaningless conjecture. No, that's not right. No matter what direction it was, he cherished his life. It was just that there were no miracles without a goal. He was not willing to give up even the last bit of hope. And Wang seemed to read his mind. We aren't aimless. Remember the human-faced arachnid? Its source. That corporation that uses money to conceal its strange smell. They want to make medicine out of the human-faced arachnid? What kind of reason is that? Quantum Corporation? The Gate of Truth? Zheng Xiao was speechless for a time. It was hard for him to connect these two elements that did not match, but An Wang firmly believed in this point. His will was incomparably firm. We have already lost the initiative. Right now we must seize this opportunity back without hesitation. Only we have the qualifications to touch the gate of truth. The authority of truth is destined to be held in our hands. Zheng Xiao suddenly understood why he was never able to increase his rank. Perhaps every single one of the 100 people standing at the top of the order was a paranoid lunatic like An Wang. He was about to give up communicating, but the unwillingness in his heart made his thoughts throb. An Wang. It was also at this moment that the centenarian opposite him used the most efficient method to say to him, "Pray, child. Pray that the gate of truth." Or, as the Holy Bible says, under the thick clouds, on the island covered in boiling magma, demons carrying chains on their backs pass through the clouds. Order wraps around disorder, and disorder devours order. Perhaps we will find a corner of the clouds, and there will be a powerful demon that the Holy Bible says will cross the sky and take our place. To hell with the demons! To hell with the Holy Scripture! Holy, holy God, gate, holy gate. In holy devil. Holy evolution. Seize. Demon. In the creation God. In of it. In. And. In. And Chungli's thoughts were like a fine thread that could snap at any time. It groaned in the storm. He is more stubborn than I expected. That's good. And Wang was very satisfied with his grandnephew's reaction. On the other side, Zheng Xiao felt a chill in his heart. He sensed something and cast his consciousness toward the center of the evolution field. Unknowingly, the two ends of the scales of truth had formed a horizontal line that was relative to the evolution field's triangular region. 3 first ablatums, 8 ablatum knights, and dozens of priests and knights. Their life force was mixed with the heart of fear and the heart of madness. Together, they fused into a huge amount of chaos element. Especially within Chungli's massive output, at least for the moment, it formed a precious balance with Fairchild. Zheng Xiao opened his mouth but nothing came out. His thoughts projected the last bit of information. But we are still in the spatial fault. And Wang's response was like a placebo. Child, you must be clear. This is an opportunity. An excellent opportunity. As the old man's thoughts became clear, Zheng Xiao suddenly felt his body and soul tremble. With the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth and the 3 first ablatums as the fulcrum, the three-dimensional structure constructed began to tremble and warp. The intertwining effects of power were too complex. It was hard to observe, but the final wave that formed swept across the material plane of the logic world in an instant. At this moment, Zheng Xiao saw Ouyangchen. This theoretical number 1 person of Xia City was frowning. He cast his gaze toward the projection of the materialized scales of truth. This scene did not require An Wang to relay it. All he needed to do was to scan through the spread of the wave and transmit the information back to him. Zheng Xiao gathered even more information. For example, he roughly understood the boundary of the logic world. It was the area where the 3 high-rise buildings were connected. It had a radius of a kilometer or so. But here came the problem. If he was sealed inside, how could he talk about verification? Before he could finish his thought, the frequency of the wave led by the scales of truth could be described as such. A subtle change occurred. Correspondingly, the wave cut into the mental plane. According to the ancient records of the order, the mental plane was like a boundless ocean. It was incomparably vast and incomparably deep. A person's mental consciousness was like a fish. Some could only swim in the shallow waters, while others could swim tens of thousands of meters under the sea. Of course, this was just a metaphor. Metaphors were often miles away from reality. But no matter what, it was extremely difficult to enter the deep sea. The cultivation ancient records of the order roughly divided the mental plane into 5 layers: shallow, intermediate, deep, abyssal, and extreme. Jing Xiao was the clear-oath first ablatum. Even when he was in his best state, he could only sway at the edge of the intermediate zone. But now, following the rapid change in the frequency of the wave, his body and soul trembled violently. It was as if he had warped and mixed into an ugly, monstrous fish. With a sudden plunge, he entered the deep sea that he had never experienced before. He also received the feedback of a terrifying pressure. Jing Xiao groaned. He felt as if the muscles and bones of his entire body were severely deformed. His soul was even more warped beyond recognition. Amidst the extreme pressure and pain, a wealth of information was transmitted back to him. But he did not even have the strength to receive the vast majority of the information, let alone understand it. Perhaps An could. Could he really? Through the evolution field, Zheng Xiao could faintly sense that An was not having a good time either. Every change in the frequency of the wave led by the holy artifact was an absolute torment to the body of the centenarian. The damage caused was irreversible. This was verification. Verification at the cost of one's life. Jing Xiao was not sure whether or not he had heard a sound. Chapter 242. In the end, Jing Xiao's mind was still clear. The relevant concepts quickly became clear in his mind. You released number 3. He originally did not have the strength to converse with An, but seeing this scene, his mind surged and he actually squeezed out a bit of energy. An did not respond. He probably did not have the time because at this moment there was an explosion. The edge of Building A's rooftop suddenly collapsed. A dazzling light leaped up from below like a miniature sun. Fairchild stepped out from within the rippling waves of light. He walked with large strides toward the burning An behind the magic array. 20 meters away, Ouyang Chen gently shook his head. Even this subtle movement was caught by Child. He turned his face and stared at the extraordinary who had been a spectator for a considerable amount of time with his gray eyes. Child's deep voice seemed to be able to shake the air on the rooftop. Do you still think this is a laboratory? In a sense, yes, Ouyang Chen calmly admitted. This logic world is my laboratory. How unfortunate. You let someone crazier than you in. Your experiment is bound to be a mess. Fairchild's footsteps did not stop. As he spoke, he crashed into the automatic defensive circle of the evolution field. Gloomy flames burned around his body, but not a single spark could penetrate the white light surrounding his body. Of course, the priests and knights could go forward to stop him, but the people who were immersed in fear and panic could not muster the courage to do so. Fairchild arrived outside the magic array unimpeded. His movements were still crisp and efficient. He extended his hand and shattered the cocoon-shaped diagram of light into fragments that filled the sky. One of the 3 pillars of the evolution field, and it was also the most important one, had been shattered just like that. Correspondingly, the 2 first ablatums on the rooftops of Building B and Building C screamed miserably at the same time, as if they had lost control of high-voltage electricity. The diagram of light around them twisted and collapsed. Jing Xiao fared slightly better. He had discovered Fairchild rushing to the rooftop in time. He was mentally prepared. Although the backlash was fierce, it was not fatal. However, on the other rooftop, An Chengli, who was already out of his wits, was not so lucky. Forcefully entering the depths of the mental plane was already too much for him to bear. The backlash from the collapse of the pillar of the evolution field destroyed his fleshly body in the first instant. The splattered flesh and blood turned into burning torches before they could completely disperse. The pain of his flesh being torn apart and being burned incinerated and Chungli's willpower into ashes. He knelt on both knees and then collapsed onto the ground. He rolled around and let out anguished howls, each one weaker than the last. Meanwhile, in Block A, the dark flames around Wang expanded by 1/2 meter. The intensity of the flames had multiplied many times over. His robes and his skinny body were all ablaze. The light of the fire penetrated deep into his body. Through the flames, one could even see the emptiness behind him. But Wang only stood there quietly. He maintained the triangular seal that corresponded to the evolution field. He only raised his face slightly. His eyes were still turbid amidst the flames as they met Fairchild's gray pupils. The moment their gazes met, he opened his mouth slightly and spoke in a weak voice from his already scorched throat, "As long as you yearn for the truth, it will definitely be on both sides of the scale. But there is no need to be at the mercy of chaos." Child stepped forward again and punched in Wang's head. The external force of the fist and the internal flames acted at the same time. The old man's head was instantly smashed into fireworks that filled the sky. Child's expression did not change in the slightest when he succeeded in one strike. This was because he knew that the target his fist had shattered did not have much meaning. His fist, which he had yet to withdraw, slightly tightened. An invisible shockwave was launched from the material plane. It charged into the mental plane and penetrated extremely deep. But in the end, he was still a step too slow. Some incorporeal shadow leaped out from Wang's burning body and concealed itself in the depths of the void. Child raised his head and his gaze pointed to the center of the triangle formed by the 3 buildings. It was the void directly above Frost River reality. There, the materialized projection of the scales of truth stood amidst the rolling waves of light. The evolution field had lost its pillar and could completely collapse at any moment. But the projection of the scales of truth still appeared to be stable. This was not just the miraculous effects of the holy object. It was the support of a new power. On the rooftop of Block C, Zheng Xiao could no longer stand. He barely managed to control his body and sat on the ground. He looked down in a daze. Within the distorted and turbulent evolution field, the originally malevolent image became even uglier. Before, he had only seen the occasional insect limb. Now, it appeared before his eyes in a seriously distorted posture. Of course, it was no longer an insect. It was a clear demonic shadow. The slender limbs moved within the waves of light. The demonic body of man and arachnid that was one with one clung to the lower part of the projection of the scales of truth. The 6-eyed demon eye flickered with light. No one knew who its attention was focused on. "Number 3, Zheng Xiao murmured. Number 3 was a human-faced arachnid. The Order of Justice was one of the first powers to clearly set out to search for and utilize the human-faced arachnid. They relied on their first move and accurate information to capture a total of 5 human-faced arachnid clones over the past 10 days. They were arranged according to numbers 1 to 5. After some research and testing, the human-faced arachnid clones devoured each other. There was also a specimen that was sent to the first sacrifice. In the end, only number 3 was left. It was kept at Wang's place. No one knew what the old man would do. Now, Wang's head had been smashed by Fairchild's fist. Number 3, who had remained hidden all this time, had revealed itself. Furthermore, it had thrown itself into the collapsing evolution field a step earlier. Zheng Xiao was in a state of confusion. His consciousness, which was still being pulled and controlled by the evolution field, connected with a chaotic and restless power. Human-faced arachnid, number 3. Zheng Xiao instinctively wanted to use the method of controlling the human-faced arachnid to secure the initiative. But in the next instant, he came into contact with a cold and clear plane behind the chaotic power. The information in his consciousness rippled like light wave. The frequency was so familiar. At this moment, Jing Zhao's hair stood on end. And one? Number 3 did not respond. He could see that its 6 demonic eyes and its ugly head were pointing in a different direction at the same time. It was the rooftop of Building B where Enchantment was. In the next moment, Number 3 suddenly disappeared from the plane that could be sensed. By the time Jing Zhao relied on his perception ability, which had yet to be completely withdrawn from the mental plane, to lock onto Number 3's position, Number 3 had already crashed into the depths of the mental plane. Its target was clear. It covered the rooftop of Building B in an instant. Its sharp limbs pierced downwards. Before the attack could land, another demonic figure soared into the sky from the remains of Enchantment's body, which was about to be completely burned away. It leaped into the void. Jing Zhao saw it clearly. It was another human-faced arachnid. The spoils of war hidden away. A consciousness suddenly came to him. It was extremely clear. Even though Jing Zhao was mentally prepared, he was still so startled that he nearly blurted out, "Unwang!" The consciousness flashed. In the depths of the mental plane, the two ugly monsters collided together. Victory and defeat were practically decided in an instant. Number 3, or rather, Unwang, used its nightmarish chalicery to shred half of the spoils of war. Then it bit down forcefully, completely swallowing the food that was half in its mouth. In the end, it chewed off the head of the human-faced arachnid, which was indistinguishable from each other. The two ugly heads came together and one swallowed the other. The scene of the human-faced arachnid cannibalism had never been as nauseating as it was now. Chapter 243. Disregarding Enwang's actions for the moment, his judgment should be correct. The human-faced arachnid that had appeared on Enwang's body was most likely the spoils of war that Enwang had hidden from the human-faced arachnid hunting operation. Not only did it not provide any help to Enchantment, but it also turned the tables on him when he was in his most dire straits. The spoils of war had undoubtedly absorbed the nutrients from Enwang. But compared to Number 3, who had devoured many of its own kind, there was still an essential difference. Number 3 should be able to sense this difference. It wanted to escape with all its heart, but it was still a step too late. Not to mention the fact that the nutrients it had just devoured had been completely poured out, it had become a part of Number 3. Jing Zhao could clearly feel the entire process of the human-faced arachnids devouring. This was definitely not a good experience. If even he was like this, then what about Enwang? Number 3's actions were very much in line with its ugly outer shell and violent instincts. But if Enwang was added to the mix, then the meaning would be completely different. From Jing Zhao's perspective, perhaps Enwang could be 10 times more vicious than he was just now, but he would never use such a crude method. He was like a beast with low intelligence. Enwang? Child, are you all right? Jing Zhao was nearly rendered speechless when his own lines were stolen. But the pressing situation forced him to try. Enwang, I can't hold on much longer. You don't need to. Jing Zhao's meaning was that he hoped to separate his thoughts from the depths of the mental plane. He hoped that he would no longer be bound to the evolution field and the human-faced arachnid. But Enwang's reply was despairing. Child, you are very important. Very important. The evolution field completely collapsed the moment their thoughts intersected. But Jing Zhao was unable to retract his projected thoughts. It was like a tenacious kite string. One end was connected to Jing Zhao, and the other end was pulled by the human-faced arachnid that Enwang was residing in. It floated in the endless void. This feeling was not unfamiliar. The Order of Justice had long since grasped the method to control the human-faced arachnid. When they conducted experiments, the first ablatums were the controllers. This feeling was very complicated. It was like a combination of walking a dog and flying a kite. Sometimes, the phenomenon of a soul attachment would occur. It was as if one had transformed into a human-faced arachnid and roamed in the depths of the void. Because of his discovery of this phenomenon, Anwang had even specially developed an application. It was a faith product provided to large clients, the source of tonight's chaos, the human-faced arachnid exoskeleton armor. But now, it seemed that there was a deep reason why Anwang was so concerned about his little invention. Perhaps he had long since anticipated that there would be a day when he would ride a true human-faced arachnid and dive into the deepest depths of the mental plane? After many days of experimentation, Zheng Xiao was very clear that the depth of the human-faced arachnid's dive on the mental plane far exceeded that of the first ablatums. There were 5 types of depths in the spiritual plane: the shallow zone, the middle zone, the deep zone, as well as the abyss zone and the polar zone. In short, they were known as the 3 zones, 1 zone and 1 zone. Those who were not extraordinaries, or those who had specialized in B class and above, would find it very difficult to enter the latter 2 levels. Zheng Zhao's limit was the middle zone, and even within Wang's profound spiritual cultivation, he could only stay in the deep zone. If he wanted to go deeper, he would need the support of a holy artifact and pay a considerable price. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, staying in the deep zone was the most normal thing. It could enter the abyss zone or even the depths of the polar zone at any time. This sort of zone had already been completely cut off from the material plane. It was impossible for any purely physical instrument to detect its existence. In other words, this sort of darksider life form completely followed its instincts in its actions. It had no intelligence to speak of. It would often enter the shallow zone of its own accord because of the temptation of food and react with the emotions and consciousness of people. This gave people the opportunity to capture it. Yes, as long as the human-faced arachnid interfered with an external object, it would inevitably affect the depth of its concealment. The degree of influence corresponded to the depth of the interference target on the mental plane. The closer the depth of the 2 sides was, the smaller the influence on the human-faced arachnid. Zheng Xiao had a general understanding of Anwang's current resolute method of doing things. Perhaps he could reduce the influence of the interference to the minimum. He could use the human-faced arachnid's innate talent to search for the gate of truth hidden in the depths of the boundless void. Anwang had already begun to move. The marvelous probing waves were transformed by the human-faced arachnid to cut into the deeper depths of the mental plane. Zheng Xiao wasn't too clear about the specific process of probing as a kite string, but there was one thing he didn't understand. Why did it have to search on the mental plane? Was the gate of truth nothing more than an illusory spirit? Just as he was puzzled, Anwang took the initiative to communicate telepathically with him. "It's a pity, child. I can't pass on my current experience to you. You don't understand how interesting this experience is. What I can tell you is this: don't use the popular analogy of the order to speculate on the truth. The structure of the mental plane, the way the mental and the material interferes, is much more interesting than you can imagine. Of course, I also have to thank Ouyang, thank his laboratory." On the rooftop of Building A, Fairchild turned his face and looked at Ouyang Chen, who had just walked to his side. "How long are you going to let Anwang corrupt your laboratory?" Ouyang Chen loosened his bow tie a bit, allowing himself to enter a more relaxed state. At the same time, he became more engrossed. He let out a breath and said softly, "It's true that it's good to reinforce a house when an earthquake is already brewing, but it's impossible to reinforce a city. We need to release a certain amount of energy, and sometimes we even need to detonate it. This is what the laboratory does." Fairchild sneered. "You and Anwang must get along very well." "I used to." Ouyang Chen did not deny it. Then he asked in reply, "Mr. Fairchild, are you not going to provide some information? I know nothing about Anwang's plans." "I'm talking about the human-faced arachnid." "The human-faced arachnid? This dark-side life form is more marvelous than we can imagine. Quantum Corporation is one way of saying it. The Society's research is another. Of course, there's also the Order of Justice. Is there a place for it in the ancient records of the Order? Fairchild sank into deep thought. He needed to recall and weigh the pros and cons. However, the development of the situation did not give him much time. Number 3, who was floating in the depths of the void, had already switched frequencies for the 5th time under Anwung's control. This time, there were some subtle changes. Anwung was not sure what Fairchild saw. He projected his thoughts over with incomparable concentration. However, a more substantial change occurred within Number 3. It occurred in the depths of the human-faced arachnid's inherent chaos. Hua-la-la sounds rang out, like the trembling of a chain. There was practically no pattern to the random trembling, but this sound that could be sensed and distinguished was itself incompatible with the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. Chapter 244. Anwung never rejected order, but he wanted it to be under his control. Right now, all of his energy was focused on controlling the probing of the outside world. He was unable to completely take care of the interior of the human-faced arachnid. Even if he did, it would be useless. Anwung had once attempted to sort out the chaotic interior of the human-faced arachnid to form a complete model, but he had failed, as expected. This was because chaos was the nature of the human-faced arachnid. It could not be changed. Therefore, he needed to use the kite string that was Zheng Xiao to resist the primal chaos within the human-faced arachnid's body. He needed to maintain his basic rationality so that he wouldn't be completely suppressed by the human-faced arachnid's instinct. But now, Anwung had actually sensed the power of order within the human-faced arachnid's body. He had never doubted the results of his research, so the answer was very clear. An external force had joined the fray. Without a doubt, this power came from the spoils of war. That thing had clearly been shattered by the human-faced arachnid's devouring power, but for some unknown reason, it was pieced back together. Chaos was shattered, and it could only become even more chaotic. The fact that it could be pieced back together meant that its chaos was just a disguise, a brilliant simulation. This reminded Anwung of the conviction product he had just developed. The little thing was a reflection of his thoughts. He had wanted to spend some time combing through it and collecting more data, but Child's appearance had ruined his initial plan. From that moment on, the development of the situation became more and more ridiculous, and now, it was completely unrecognizable. Simple recollections were meaningless, but clear content could help people organize their thoughts. Following this clue all the way back, Anwung finally confirmed that his previous judgment had been wrong. That was definitely not some spoils of war. It was a replica. Perhaps it was a product of faith that he had created. As far as he knew, the current owner of that thing had been replaced by a certain young man. From the taste he had just swallowed, that thing was more advanced than his initial version, to the point that it was almost as if it was the real thing. However, Anwung was not surprised. That young man had some kind of unbelievable power of order, and with his special ability, he was able to stop the changes of the unbalanced state time and time again. Ouyang Chen should express his gratitude. Otherwise, he might not have had the time to set up the logic world. However, Anwung also remembered that the young man should have been isolated from the logic world. What a miraculous little fellow! Of course, it was also infuriating. The deviation in the direction of his mind caused Anwung's previous probing efforts on the mental plane to go to waste. He lost that momentary clue that might have led to the gate of truth. However, he did not let emotions like anger take the upper hand. Instead, he directed the probe waves in the opposite direction immediately. Anwung performed a self-examination on the human-faced arachnid, locking onto the elements of order that were incompatible with chaos. He seized the opportunity to push back. Any search and probing would be empty talk if the source of interference wasn't disposed of. The vibrating vibrations of the chains grew clearer and clearer. The corresponding information continued to join and combine, finally forming a dark chain. It twisted and stretched, piercing through the interior of number three's chaotic shell. It radiated countless strands of barbs that seeped into every part of the human-faced arachnid. The situation was much more troublesome than Wang had originally judged. The power of order used this form to declare its invasion of the human-faced arachnid. As for the longer part of the chain, it extended into the depths of the mental plane. Without a doubt, the other end must be contacting that boy wonder. He's called Luonan, right? And Wang's thoughts coiled, forming an incorporeal incantation. He had seen Luonan's basic information before. He had used the evolution field to lock onto Luonan's aura. This was enough for a secret-bound first ablatum. A highly lethal secret spell gradually formed. He would fire it without hesitation the instant he locked onto his target. He would forcefully blast through the barrier between the mental and the material plane, eliminating the worry of the rear. This was not the smartest method, but it was the most straightforward. Even if this would cause his parasitic soul within the human-faced arachnid to enter a dangerously weak state. And Wang's mind extended out along the chain. With the assistance of the human-faced arachnid, the sealed and chaotic void structure of the logic world was no longer able to block it. And Wang originally had no intention of using this ability on the plane of reality. But now, the situation had changed. He roughly remembered the last place Luonan appeared before the logic world was erected. He traced the direction of the chain and scanned the plane of reality at the same time. And Wang was confident that he could lock onto his target within 2 seconds. The probing wave smoothly cut out of the logic world. It was hard for Ouyang Chen to control the probing power of the human-faced arachnid. But at this moment, the information that came flooding in from the outside was not the scene of a metropolis. Instead, it was a starry sky that left one in a daze. It was so unfamiliar. And Wang was dazed for only an instant. He soon came to a realization. This was the projection of a certain person's consciousness. He had already made direct contact with Luonan. The kid's combat experience seemed to be lacking. He practically had no anti-detection methods in a confrontation on the mental plane. The two sides instantly clashed. Short? And Wang was just about to blast out the secret spell of death, but he had no choice but to stop. He had never imagined that the scene of a person's consciousness could be this vast and majestic. It was true that the power within was practically non-existent, but this kind of performance in itself was an inconceivable achievement. This was just the reproduction of Luonan's perception. He needed to trace back to the origin to find Luonan's core consciousness, but behind this starry sky scene were the auras of countless living beings. They appeared here in the form of stars. Together, they formed a vast and hazy structure. Plus, the scene formed from Luonan's observation and perception was absolutely not just grand. He made full use of the mental plane, including the reality of the logic world. The starry sky looked flat and uniform as a whole, but it actually contained complex and warped details. It was like a maze. As for Luonan's core consciousness, it was hidden behind layers upon layers of curtains. It was hard to discern its location. If Luonan had truly used his power to forcefully construct the scene, and one could have charged in all directions and relied on feedback to find his target. But in the pure domain of perception, the more one searched, the easier it was to be led by the nose. Also, the environment here was simply like a fragrant soup pot for the human-faced arachnid. Its powerful and terrifying instincts began to stir once more. This diluted Wang's power. And Wang made a prompt decision. He gave up on probing the plane of reality. He didn't want to waste any more time. He still had the chain. The power of the heavily chained crow was increasing. It had a restraining effect on the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. It made number 3 feel uneasy. And Wang simply strengthened number 3's instincts in this aspect. He let number 3 search in reverse along the chain. No matter what, the master of this chain was undoubtedly Luonan. Number 3's probing suddenly came to a halt. This was because at this moment, an absolutely oppressive feeling came whistling from the other end of the chain. The sudden increase in pressure turned the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid into a pot of boiling oil. If the human-faced arachnid possessed consciousness, its boiling instincts would certainly drive it to scream loudly, "Danger! Danger!" A terrifying power of the same origin but different descended with a rumble. Number Three's combat instincts were pushed to their limit. A battle across space erupted in an instant, and Wang's control suddenly fell to its lowest point before the boiling instincts of the human-faced arachnid. He was like a small boat bobbing up and down amidst the roaring lava. He could capsize at any time. The situation was out of his control once more. He suddenly understood. The one at the other end of the chain was absolutely not Luonan. It was a damned human-faced arachnid. An extremely powerful one. Chapter 245. The instantaneous spatial perception was quite clear. The distance between the two human-faced arachnids was extremely far. At the very least, it far exceeded the limits of the normal senses between human-faced arachnid. In other words, this was a collision that should not have occurred. Then was this a trap? A trap specifically targeted at the human-faced arachnid, a trap targeted at Wang? Before Wang could understand the root cause of the change in the situation, the clash between the human-faced arachnids had already entered a white-hot state. The hazy starry sky was filled with the powerful pressure of hostility. Number Three's body was forcefully warped. Every movement was an all-out confrontation between tangible and intangible forces. For this reason, the chaotic power within Number Three revolved at a higher speed. It was like a boiler, crushing and incinerating all internal fuel in order to provide an even more powerful internal energy. From Wang's perspective, this was simply a calamity. After he abandoned his fleshly body, his soul was placed within Number Three's body, achieving a partial fusion. But in the end, they had not completely fused as one. There was still a considerable portion, the most crucial portion of his intelligence, that remained independent. After boiler Number Three was activated, nearly a tenth of Wang's soul region had evaporated in a few short seconds. Many of his memory materials had been wiped out in an instant, causing him to be slightly dazed. Only when Jing Xiao, who was affected, let out a blood-curdling scream did Wang suddenly wake up. The kite string was about to break. How could the chain still be so sturdy? A self-mocking thought flashed through Wang's mind. He forced himself to forget the imminent threat of death. He poured his own power into the chain in an attempt to control Number Three and break free from it. The heavily chained crow was the only channel to contact the two human-faced arachnid. It was also the main battlefield where the two human-faced arachnids clashed. If Wang wanted to destroy the clash, breaking the chain was the most effective method. With Wang's help, Number Three's power suddenly rose by a level. Her 8 limbs plucked at the void, moving with all her might in an attempt to go against the chain. The heavily chained crow became perfectly straight. The pulling force and the opposing force acted at the same time, causing the shaking of the chain to intensify. The vibrations of the chain connected into one, and finally turned into the sharp wung-wung sound of a rubber band on the verge of collapse. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The more intense the clash between the human-faced arachnids, the more terrifying the internal pressure of boiler Number Three became. The domain of Wang's soul continued to be corroded, but he still needed to accelerate the process to ensure the output of Number Three's power. This was the stupidest kind of consumption, but in a rush, Wang had no other choice. At this moment, Wang felt that he and the heavily chained crow were like 2 burning sticks of gunpowder. It was a matter of who would burn to the end first, ignite the explosives, and explode. The truth is above. Buzz. The prayer and the trembling occurred at the same time. Another wave of collision exploded on the chains. The powerful impact finally broke through the limits of the heavily chained crow, causing it to suddenly lose its special structure and collapse with a hum. 03's body suddenly stopped as the chain was broken. However, Unweng was not happy at all. At this moment, the area of his soul had shrunk to 2/3 of its original size. A large amount of memory material had been annihilated. Even with his tenacious will, he appeared to be in a trance for a while. In addition, in the final clash of power, Unweng no longer had the strength to protect other areas. Jing Zhao's kite string had also been severed. 03 floated in the hazy starry sky. Starlight filled the sky, but there was no longer any clear trail to guide it. It was as if it had lost its way in the starry sky and had lost its direction. Unweng caught his breath and sorted out the area of his soul that had become a mess. He also tried to use this opportunity to increase his control over 03. However, just as his soul area was gradually spreading towards the chaotic area of 03, the internal pressure of the boiler number 3, after a short period of cooling, ignited with a rumble. Unweng forcefully endured the pain of being roasted by poisonous fire, ensuring that his heart was clear. However, his mind still sank heavily. 03 slowly turned its body. Its instincts were restless again, and it was even more intense than when it was in the fierce battle earlier. At this moment, Unweng heard a kind of fine low-pitched sound. It was like the background noise that existed in a big city at all times. It was faint and undetectable, yet everywhere. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see a lot of messy information. Amidst this faint noise that was hard to ignore, the shadow was like a muddy river that silently flowed past. A huge and ugly body floated out from within. Its limbs were spread out, and its demonic eyes flickered. When it first appeared, it was at the side of 03. When its crooked and bent body completely floated above the shadowy water, it was already in front of 03. Through 03, Unweng locked onto his target from number 3's perspective. This human-faced arachnid was clearly a size larger than 03. Its body was more solid as well. The powerful pressure that assaulted its face made it hard for 03 to suppress its restlessness. 03's instincts should lean towards fleeing, but in the end it chose to stay in this star field. This had nothing to do with courage. The reason for this was the incorporeal power of order. It had been placed into this hazy starry sky, turning it into a strange cage. Even though it was boundlessly vast, the two human-faced arachnids had already locked each other firmly. Only when victory and defeat were decided, when life and death were decided, would this be the final conclusion. It was that mysterious chain. It seemed to have collapsed, but in reality, it had turned from being tangible to incorporeal. It had used an even more inconceivable form to arrange order. It had displayed an inescapable coercive power. Just as Unweng understood this clearly, the human-faced arachnids had already begun fighting again. The human-faced arachnids were not like intelligent life forms. They did not speak nonsense. Under the urge of their instincts, both sides activated their charging mode and collided with each other. Number 3's left commissary were bitten off by the powerful arachnid in just a single exchange. The powerful arachnid swallowed the commissary into its stomach. Number 3's sharp limbs on the same side stabbed into the side of the arachnid's humanoid body. The wound sizzled and burned. Bloody flames soared. The two human-faced arachnids let out soundless roars of pain at the same time. But this kind of direct wrestling mode did not change at all. It was as if they had returned to the ancient Colosseum. They used the most bloody form to please others. Then at this moment, who was the one they were trying to please? Unweng strove to maintain a clear line of thought during the confrontation between the human-faced arachnids. The changes in the chain displayed the exquisite switching of the power of order. This was absolutely not a spontaneous change. At the very least, there was a frame that encompassed this starry sky. Who did the frame belong to? Unweng knew the answer. But in the face of this hazy starry sky, even with his experience and ruthlessness, it was hard for him to come up with a suitable method to lock onto the person behind the scenes. Unless Number three's body trembled violently once more. It was at a complete disadvantage in this wrestling. Right now, half of its ugly face had been bitten off by the powerful arachnid. It had lost half of its six-colored demonic eyes. Its aura was rapidly weakening. There was no chance of victory if this continued. And Wang only used a tenth of a second to make a final judgment. The corresponding choice did not take up too much time. His mind reflected internally. A gloomy round bead appeared within the area of his soul. The bead was covered densely with strange and bizarre patterns. This was the secret curse of death that he had formed in order to kill Luonan as quickly as possible. Right now, Anwang did not hesitate at all. His soul's strength crushed over, shattering the secret curse. A fatal negative energy swept through the area of his soul. The pain of his mind was indescribable with words, but he could use a similar method to vent it. His mind surged and he roared loudly on the mental plane. Chapter 246. An invisible wave swept across the starry sky, spreading far and wide. At Anwang's side, he still understood the true meaning of the fluctuations. Expanding another circle, only pure power was exposed, pushing outwards layer by layer. Under the effect of this power, the starlight that filled the sky was like candlelight in a gale, about to be extinguished. In fact, no stars could be destroyed. This hazy starry sky was nothing more than a projection of Luonan's perception. It was purely a picture of information. What Anwang was doing now was using the probing waves to sort out the veins within, following the path of the projection and pouring the relevant information back into the material plane. The blessing of the projection of the scales of truth, the information of the deadly secret curse, and the instincts of the human-faced arachnid merged together. Its penetrative power was incomparable. Whether it was the logic world or the scene of Luonan's consciousness, none of them were able to isolate it. The probing waves pushed forward layer by layer, and they soon received result. In the material plane, in the metropolis, the flames of life flickered. There was no actual damage, but within the area of influence, there was information that resembled the ravings of hallucinations. It flowed into the tens of thousands of people. The vast majority of the information would be unconsciously filtered out by people. A small portion would form a relatively clear consciousness, but it would be ignored due to the lack of corresponding information. Only a limited few pieces of information would touch upon those with keen senses, who were familiar with Luonan, and form an instinctive reaction, forming feedback. Although it was limited, it was enough. Nanster, is someone calling you? Shuelei turned his head in all directions, but couldn't see anything. He was quite puzzled for a moment. Luonan went, "Oh," but he didn't respond. He continued to look up at the sky. It was unknown when the autumn rain that had fallen for the middle of the night had stopped. The power supply at Frost River Reality had yet to be restored, and the evacuation of the trapped citizens was nearing its end. The sounds of people gradually grew sparse, making the night seem as dark as ink and the shadows of the buildings dim. The clearing of the outer region was almost complete. The sniper point at Yulon Hotel had just been confirmed to be cleared. The members of the association all went to the street where the Yulon Hotel was located. This was currently the command center for the government and the military, and it was also the most well-informed place. The military ships slowly entered the airspace above, representing the military's full involvement in the incident. The warship was floating above the city. This was a rare sight, and it attracted a large number of people to watch and point at it. Although Luonan's gaze was also looking up, it was directed at the area of Frost River Reality. The profoundness of the logic world was reflected in the pitch-black cluster of high-rise buildings, behind the void where the naked eye could not see. Shuelei didn't receive a response, so he didn't think much of it. He imitated Luonan and raised his head to look at the conjoined building complex in the distance. But no matter how he sized it up, he was unable to see anything. He could only scratch his head. The way of the world right now is really evil. With his own strength, he could casually create a space to use. It's no wonder why Hall Master Zhang said that if one isn't able to adapt to the changes in one's cultivation, one would be eliminated as soon as one awakens from it. Their gazes were also directed at the association members. The vast majority of the onlookers were still at a loss over the circumstances of the sudden disappearance of the large group of terrorists. Luo Nan and his group had already obtained a clearer answer. Papercut did his best to widen his eyes and mumbled, "So it turns out President Ouyang is watching. Logic World? The association didn't hear anything about it before. You've tricked them so badly." "I'm just taking advantage of the situation." Red Fox was the only member of the association who made direct contact with Ouyang Chen tonight. He more or less had to bear the responsibility of explaining. He shot a glance at Luo Nan and sneered, "If you want to set rules for others, how can you do it without bringing out the momentum of a thunderbolt? The logic world is erected with full explosive power. I really want to see the faces of those orders." As he spoke, Red Fox's gaze stopped on Luo Nan's face. Even with Ouyang Chen's judgment of being ignorant and the repeated verification of reality, Red Fox could not help but want to test the young man's introverted and immature performance after true contact. "Do you see anything?" Luo Nan raised his head to look at the sky, not reacting at all. Shuele coughed to remind Red Fox, but he didn't receive a response. He could only reach out and poke Red Fox. It was as if Luo Nan had just woken up from a dream. He turned his head to scan his surroundings. He Yuan was the society's full representative right now. She was communicating with the government and the military. She was so busy that not even her shadow could be seen. Bamboo Pole had followed her as a technical member. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan had gone to the military's security vehicle. It was unknown what they were up to. Cat Eyes said that she was very tired and went to find a place to daydream. Only Shuele remained by his side. Red Fox's gaze pointed at Luo Nan. It was hard to avoid awkwardness when Luo Nan and Red Fox met each other after such an intense conflict had occurred. Luo Nan had no experience in dispelling this. Shuele could not help either. Luo Nan could only blink. "What did you say?" Red Fox did not get angry. He just pointed in the direction of Frost River reality. "You are proficient in mental senses. You can see things more clearly than us. What's going on over there? Can you tell me?" "You're not looking." "No, I saw a bit earlier." Luo Nan was quite used to this sort of matter-of-fact attitude. He thought for a moment and said, "It's a precise structure that interferes with the mental plane and the material plane. It's like the shield of truth, but it's very different." It really isn't the same." Red Fox was a bit unable to continue facing Luo Nan's bewildering logic. He could only laugh dryly. Most of the manifestations of extraordinary powers are like this. He gave Luo Nan face this time. He did not let Luo Nan blurt out the word nonsense. Luo Nan was speechless for a time. He was not stumped by Red Fox's question. It was just that the results of clairvoyance were far too complicated to describe with word. Plus, the results of his clairvoyance were a sort of correction to his previous understanding. From Luo Nan's previous understanding, the mental plane was a sort of deep multi-layered structure. It was like countless curtains stacked together. The layers were distinct. The closer one was to the material plane, the thicker the curtains were, and the lowest part was connected to the material plane. They interfered with each other. The degree of interference depended on the magnitude of the applied force. Therefore, interference between the mental and material planes occurred on everyone. It was just that the interference of ordinary people was negligible. It could be ignored. The interference of ability users was much more obvious. The Shield of Truth was the most powerful and clearest interference method that Luo Nan had ever seen. It was what he believed to be the benchmark of interference between the mental and material planes. As for Rui Wen, her soul and fleshly body were as one. It was a different situation. It was incomparable. However, the interference of the logic world shattered Luonan's understanding that he had just formed not too long ago. Under the senses of his clairvoyance, the multi-layered curtains of the mental plane rolled down together. They no longer possessed the sense of layers. Instead, they overlapped and warped, even tearing apart. Some of them were originally quite a distance away from the material plane, but they forcefully converged together. Because of this, the lower layers of curtains even had an interference effect, twisting into a ball. This was the third state of the relationship between the mental and material planes that Luonan had seen. It was also the most complicated one. Chapter 247. Through a complicated method of interference between the spiritual and material planes, Ouyang Chen achieved the peeling off of the material plane's surface layer. Virtual and real interacted with each other, constructing a spatial fault that resembled the real world. The rules and regulations inside were no easier than building a skyscraper. Delving into the details would only exhaust one's mind, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Luonan was just looking at the general situation. He didn't continue to get tangled up. Far too much information was involved in explaining these things to Red Fox. A good portion of it was Luonan's personal comprehension. Right now, he lacked confidence in his ability to express himself with words. It was difficult for him to speak for a time. Just as he was pondering how to respond, the sound of a car came from behind him. Luonan was just about to turn his head to check when his neck tightened. Someone had already grabbed him by the back of his collar and forcefully dragged him over. His back smashed against the lower edge of the car. "Stop talking nonsense and get in the car." Zhang Yingying popped her head out of the carriage and urged impatiently. The vehicle she had transferred over should be a military security vehicle. It was rather large, and the rear compartment was enclosed. It would not be a problem for it to carry dozens of people. What's so urgent? Luonan thought that there was another mission, so he didn't bicker with Zhang Yingying. He nodded toward Red Fox and boarded the carriage first. Behind him, Shuelei, the Red Fox, and the others also came up one after another. However, very soon everyone was a little confused. The situation inside was a little different from what they had imagined. The space was relatively narrow, and it was densely packed with all kinds of equipment. It seemed a little crowded after a few people came in. Go to the hospital. Bai Xinyan had just taken off her trench coat and changed into a white doctor's coat. She even put on sterile gloves. She looked like she was about to go all out. Luonan was stupefied for a moment. Zhang Yingying, who was next to him, simply took off his clothes. She pulled off his outer cover and lifted his underwear. Wow! Shuelei sighed. There were so many people in the car. Luonan's face heated up. Hey! Zhang Yingying didn't care about this at all. Her fingers dug into Luonan's undergarments, and she even impudently stroked the lines of muscles on his back and waist. You might be an F-rank disabled candidate, but you actually aren't particularly skinny and weak. Her soft and smooth fingertips streaked across. The sensation was warm, but it caused Luonan to quiver and shiver. He even forgot to speak the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Judging from his body fat percentage, his physique isn't any worse than his peers. However, compared to soul energy, it's nothing. Don't move. Bai Xinyan shouted at Luonan to stop the writhing and struggling Luonan. She connected the wires of the apparatus to various parts of Luonan's body. In this way, Luonan was embarrassed to move even if he wanted to. He could only obediently allow Zhang Yingying to completely remove his clothes. He asked helplessly, "What exactly do you want?" Acting cool is fun for a moment, but in the blink of an eye, it's the crematorium. "I'm here to bring down your fever." Zhang Yingying temporarily took on the role of nurse. She felt that it was very interesting. She used her finger to poke at Luonan's body. She played quite happily. Bai Xinyan saw that Luonan's body temperature was rising. She didn't allow Zhang Yingying to tease him any further. She began to adjust the apparatus and explained, No one knows when the effects of the shield of truth will disappear. And right now, the amplification of your soul's strength is quite dangerous. One mistake and the two sides will collide. You won't even have the chance to save yourself. So, you need to be under observation for 24 hours. No matter how good the equipment here is, it's still better to be at the hospital. Luo Nan laughed bitterly. It can't be that serious, right? Just prepare for the worst. Bai Xinyan's tone was light, but in her heart, she was already certain that the trouble that awaited them would not be small. This could be seen from the fate of the first 2 generations of the Luo family. Moreover, the problem of the imbalance of body and soul was not the only problem. Red Fox's brows furrowed before Papercut's voice fell. He subconsciously extended his hand and pressed his ear. His gaze flickered toward Luo Nan. Shuelei, who was at the side, saw his actions and exclaimed, "Did you hear it too?" Red Fox indicated for him to be quiet, then he made a few gestures toward Papercut. After the logic world was established, the psychic wave network entered a state of paralysis. It had yet to recover, and the secret communication between them was far less convenient than before. Fortunately, Papercut could understand. He quickly nodded, closed his eyes, and sensed for a moment. Then his expression turned grave. The spirit summoning technique? Yeah, the spirit summoning technique. Bai Xinyan sighed, which was rare for her. I don't know what trouble your boss Luo has stirred up. And Wang is clearly trapped in the logic world. His situation is terrible, but Wang still tries to use this method to lock onto Wang's position regardless of the cost. Plus, he's almost succeeded. The gazes of everyone in the car turned toward Luo Nan. Luo Nan had nothing to say. He could only wear the apparatus and wires on his body. He acted like a puppet, allowing others to do as they pleased. The door to the car opened again at this time. Cat Eyes, who had gone into a daze just now, boarded the car. Bai Xinyan said, Sister Nun and Bamboo Pole will move together with the military. Now that everyone on our side is here, there's no need to delay. No matter who we're facing, it's always best to distance ourselves. The car suddenly increased in speed as they spoke. Soon, they left the conjoined building complex behind. The group of people was basically retreating from the battlefield. 2 minutes passed, and the group exchanged glances. The range of the spirit summoning technique should be out of range by now. The group of people let out sighs of relief. They no longer needed to pay attention to the intermittent shouts in their ears. Right now, the straight-line distance between the security car and Frost River reality was over 10 kilometers. Even the secret-bound First Ablatum would find it hard to reach, let alone Wang, who was separated by a layer of the logic world. However, Luo Nan was not particularly optimistic. He did not have any hopes that Wang would be able to remove the pressure from Wang just by moving the car. For the current Wang and even for Luo Nan, distance was not something that held much significance. The intertwining of the many layers of curtains of the logic world caused distortions to appear in the distance on the mental plane. In a situation where the distance on the material plane remained the same, a misalignment appeared between 2 points on the mental plane. It was like the overused example of spatial folding. Space was like a piece of paper. The 2 ends were far apart, but when the paper was folded, the originally long distance would become within reach. Luo Nan did not merely observe this special structural pattern. In fact, Luo Nan immediately discovered a flaw and opportunity after Wang ordered the human-faced arachnid to swallow the high imitation within Chungli's body. Through the heavily chained crow, Luo Nan used the Wraith sign, which was located far away in a secret location of the Bloodflame Order, to establish a connection with the Order of Justice's human-faced arachnid. Luo Nan used the characteristics of the logic world to take advantage of the situation to construct a colosseum, or perhaps an altar. Luo Nan used the format pyramid as a foundation to erect the framework of the altar. This was something Luo Nan was already familiar with. It did not take any effort at all. The only difference this time was the span. What Luonan could use, Unweng could use as well. The existence of the logic world had severely distorted the mental plane, but it could not stop Unweng's evil thoughts. When the evil thoughts attacked, strangely enough, the projection of the scales of truth floated in Luonan's mind, especially the pair of black and white plates floating up and down. A familiar whisper seeped into Luonan's mind. As long as one yearns for the truth, there will certainly be two sides of the scales. **********.